All right. I'm going to call to order the January 25th, 2020 meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee in the Triton High School Library at 8 a.m. This meeting is being audio and video recorded. I will read aloud the vision statement. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families in the wider community who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners, students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so thanks everybody for coming out today. This is our long budget workshop of the, at least this part of the year. So just, I usually kind of breeze over chairman's comments or chairman's remarks, but just a couple of comments here today. So I just wanted to note that we started this process basically 2 weeks ago now with budget presentations. We still have a very, very long way to go. I was counting on the calendar today. I think there's 7.5 weeks until we vote a final budget, which is with information literally changing minute to minute. Brian had to call it a stop and be like, we're not going to update documents anymore last night because the information just keeps changing. So just a reminder that what you're seeing today is the latest information, right? It's going to continue to change. I don't want anyone to take these numbers and be like, this is the number, right? We're not at that point. We're not even close to that point in the budget process yet. We're going to meet twice in February, plus have a public hearing. So we're going to be continuing to refine this as this goes forward. That said, there was a lot that happened last week as far as the state governor's preliminary budget coming out, the transportation contracts being opened. I'm trying to think. There was one more thing I feel like that was happening, but I can't remember what it was. So circuit breaker, yeah, that was, I mean, we got some more information, yeah.
In insurance, but we don't know that yet.
Yes, yeah, so all that information is kind of continuing to be compiled in this, but still in the beginning stages of this process, making that point. I've always thought of the budget process as kind of a roller coaster when we get into this part, that it's up and down. This year, I'm sharing with you that I'm intending to think of it more as whitewater rafting, because I was thinking about this last night, that every time we steer off one rock, right, you're headed toward another rock. So our goal is not necessarily to be along for the ride, which I don't think we ever have been, but that's kind of the way it's always felt, right? You're subject to third-party effect on your process. But it's to steer the clearest path down the river and hit as few rocks as we can. So with that, I'm going to open this up, and Brian's going to talk about the budget development process.
I didn't know if you...
Oh, sorry, I skipped oral communications from the public. My bad. Public? Larry? Can you, I think that mic is off. I don't see a green light on it, so I think you're going to have to click it on before you can speak. Is it? Yeah. Now it's on. I can hear it.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm going to take the liberty of sitting because I have a little bit of a problem. I requested the chair an extension of 1 to 2 minutes. Otherwise, I have to talk fast.
Do it as fast as you can, and we'll see what we can do, okay? I don't want to get in the habit of granting too many extensions. We grant an extension last week, so.
Okay, I guess the crowd will dictate the stuff. Triton versus the towns.
Can I ask Larry real quick first? Can you state your name
Yes.
and address and what how you're representing here?
Affiliations, Sure.
Thank you.
Larry White, Central Street Rowley. I am the chairman of the Finance Committee. But the views are those of myself and and not necessarily those of the other members of the Finance Committee or of the town or of other rational people. Triton versus the towns and the lack of meetings. Here we go again. Last year at a DCC meeting, I proposed a total three-town assessment not to exceed $1 million. Thought that was kind of fair. At that meeting, there was absolutely no comments pro or con, which I didn't think appropriate. This week, Rowley met the town officials discussing the budget, 2.5% increase in the new growth. Those numbers were around 600,000, and half of that is usually allocated to the school. So that would be Rowley approximately 300,000 is within the $1 million level that was suggested to Triton as Rowley's share. Triton's budget, I estimated at the time about a $2.4 million increase, and another, a distinguished colleague of mine came up with 2.5 million. And as you'll see in your discussion points, that budget increase is anywhere from 3.3 million to 2.1 or whatever. Why the discrepancy? The towns in Triton don't talk. Okay. During this presentation, you don't see, you will not hear of any of the town officials about any meetings that have been taken or will be taken on the budget process, specifically in discussing how much the towns can afford or how much Triton will need. We'll hear about Triton's needs. We'll hear the moans from the town at a later meeting. It's been proposed for about the last 5 years that state funding will save us. There's been progress made, supposedly funding for transportation, medical, whatever. So here's a proposal. The town's can afford the $1 million. Okay, if you come up with a $2.5 million budget request, then it's very easy. The balance is to come from the state. Whatever the state comes up with is part of your budget. And some of you are going to say that, well, there's a lot of special education, teacher salaries, unfunded mandates, etc., type of a thing. And I agree with that. I also agree that we can't just keep going the way that we are. Now, maybe it would be a good idea for the towns to say, well, you know what, we can't afford $2.5 million. Our assessment maybe would be 800,000 or something like that. We can afford it if we just do away with snow plowing for the year. I get taken away. It's not the first time that I've been cut off. Anyway, who's to blame? Well, there are 3 T's to blame for this. The towns. Towns haven't sent you anything, haven't made any requests or stuff like that. Triton's to blame. Triton hasn't gone out to the towns and say, we need to meet on what you people can afford.
I'm just going to note, Larry, you're just past 4 minutes right now, so I'll give you 30 seconds to wrap it.
That's all right. I've got 1 or 2 more sentences. The 3rd T is the taxpayers. you're to blame because you're not pushing Triton or the towns to meet on the budget. Maybe you like paying more and saying less. Now, some of you are going to say that my idea on the state funding for the excess,
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off. We're already a minute and a half past the allowed time, so, you know.
can I just finish my sentence?
Finish your sentence and
Thank you.
we'll call it a day.
That it's the stupidest thing that they've heard this morning, and I have to say that, yes, my idea of state funding is stupid and impractical, but it's not the dumbest thing that's been heard this morning. The dumbest thing is that there's no conversations between the town and Triton. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I'll just note, because I did omit this earlier in the list of upcoming meetings, that there is a district communications meeting this coming Wednesday at 6:30 PM here at Triton that is between members of the town select boards, the town finance committees, the school committee, the administration, and the town managers and administrators.
Which is a regular meeting.
It's a regular meeting.
Right.
That's been scheduled.
Right.
Yes.
And they meet how often?
Usually monthly. This month it was twice. Yep. Okay. But I'll invite, since we've got one more member of the public. No?
Yes.
We're in oral communications from the public, just checking. Budget development process, Brian?
So this agenda item was actually, you requested to put this on, you wanted to talk about
Yes.
how we literally, the process, the structure, and if there was thoughts and input from the committee about how any changes we would like to make.
Yes. Sorry, good point. Thank you for reminding me, because it was a mere week ago, I think, but it feels like about 3 months. So I just wanted to put this on here real quick, because one of the things that I noted when we were going through the presentations earlier this month was that I was essentially using last year's budget book and this year's budget book to find out where the line changes were within the budgets. They have that in I don't know if I can, if you look at, I'm just going to go for Pine Groves because it's the first one in my binder. But if you look at page 7, for instance, it's got the new item column. But some of these items have changed year over year, and there's not necessarily any reflection of that. The athletic director actually has in his where there was a change in how much it is. I just find it easier to have everything on one page. I've made notes in a lot of the places on mine where there were changes, just because I find that is really helpful. I wanted to see if that was something that the committee wanted to request going forward as a change in the documents that we receive, and to see if there was any other just kind of wish as far as the materials that we receive as part of the budget process, so that as we're going through this, we can kind of collect that information and potentially next year make some changes to get the committee the best and most useful information possible, I guess. Yes, Dina?
Excuse me. I actually like that idea. I've done the same thing myself, only it's in last year's budget. But I think seeing the change from year to year is beneficial not only for us, but for the public to see what the change in funding is, or where we're spending that money.
Maureen?
I agree. I think the changes would be great for all to see, but I'd also like to reiterate what I said, I believe the night of the high school athletics, and forget who else was here that night. Anyway, just that if all of the presenters could include, other funding sources. I know athletics had traditionally never done that, but, it's helpful to see what is being funded by other groups in the community. So, and I think it's important for the public to see that as well.
Good point. Paul?
So I just have one spin on that. I think it would be helpful for us not only to have the budget that we voted last year, the numbers for this year, but I think it might also be helpful to ask the administration to update it based on the amended budget, because we always vote the amended budget in October. And really, to compare apples to apples, we should make those figures, adjust the figures from the budget we voted initially to the amended budget so that we really see where we land.
So everything you have for this year is against the adjusted budget. That has always been the case. Yep. Always on the latest and greatest. Yep.
Yeah, I think to Paul's point, me going back to last year's documents, just because it's easy
Right,
to go through.
because you go to March is
Pine
the
Grove
most readily.
specifically,
Yep,
yes.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, but all of the year over year in the summary is adjusted to requests. So fiscal '20 adjusted, which was, it was late, right? It was Michelle's last meeting in November. But you're right, the detail in the detailed pages doesn't have any year over year. So that would obviously be more helpful to have that.
Yes.
And as I had shared with Marissa, I mean, this has been a process that has evolved over the years, and, Michelle added this level of detail, which is great. So when Kyle takes the reins, and T-minus 1 week and counting, or 9 days, then, every year, as we've done all along, we want the process to be better. So certainly, this is helpful feedback, and if there are other things that you think would be helpful, would love to hear them.
Okay. Anything else before we move on? Okay. Moving on to the regional agreement, section 16, incurring of debt. Normally this would be a business meeting item, but given that we're in a tight time frame between meetings we had established and the upcoming district communication meeting, I had to put it on this agenda. So if you look at Annex 1, you'll see a letter that went out to the towns, and I'll give you kind of a brief background on this. So at our business meeting in January, which was the 7th, something like that, 8th, I believe it was, we had a copy of the regional agreement that had all of the commentary from DESI on it. And we talked about that, and we got feedback. On the 9th, we met with the District Communication Committee, and we went through all that. On the morning of the 9th, prior to that meeting, Brian and I got an email from Paul Mayette, who's one of the Newbury Finance Committee members, asking about this particular section. When we looked at it and went back and looked at kind of our historical process, which obviously we don't do this all that often, so, and also looked at all the MGL references and kind of spelled it out against the process that we've used. What we found was that all of the samples, all the sample text, which we picked the one that we thought matched our process the best, from DESI that we had used in the agreement that you saw on the 8th at our business meeting, reference Chapter 71, Section 16D, which says that the towns, that the district, once it votes to incur debt, has to notify the towns via the district treasurer. At that point, the towns can either choose to call a town meeting within 60 days, or they can choose to not call a town meeting and thereby just accept the incurring of debt. That's apparently, from the regional agreements I've looked through since, that's kind of the standard. Our process actually has been, in most recent years, to use Chapter 71, Section 16N, in which we can incur the debt, and then it automatically has to go on an article and through the town meeting process. It can't, there's no, like, you can just accept it, but there's also no time frame on it, from my understanding. That 60-day time frame doesn't exist. So you could literally vote it in February. The next annual town meetings are April and May, and that's the point when that vote would happen. We historically have voted the method as part of the incurring debt vote. And my guess is, historically, that's been done based on conversations with the towns to say, how should this be voted, and the situation as well. Is it something that's huge and it needs to go to a town meeting, and we want to give everybody plenty of lead-up time? Is this an emergency situation, a small amount? Holding a town meeting would be would incur costs that doesn't necessarily need to be incurred, and we want to get the option should be there to just allow the towns to not call a town meeting and just allow that approval to go through. I requested from DESI sample language that reflected the use of D or N with the selection happening at the time of the vote, which is what we'd historically done. DESI responded with language to that effect, which that night, of course, the language that we had already reviewed on the 8th had already gone out to the DCC, so we brought a supplemental sample paper with that new language in it on the 9th. Of all the things that we discussed that night, I would say it was the most under discussion, in part because it was confusing and it was a last-minute update, but I think also because, it's an important part of the agreement. So, the towns had requested time to take that back to their boards. They had requested additional information, which is where this letter comes from, kind of spelling out what's historically happened, the options that are available. It includes all the Mass General law that lies behind this section. So my goal in bringing this back to you today is to give you a chance before the 29th to weigh in on this language and provide any input on it so that when we have our DCC meeting on the 29th, I have something to go in and say, this is how the school committee feels about this particular set of language. So I'll open it up to comments.
I was going to say the one thing to add, and I think you said this, that
Yeah.
we just need to have a default.
Yes.
That I think preferably the agreement still in statute allows towns in the district to determine the best way. Again, if it's small potatoes and the towns don't want to call a town meeting, that's easy. If it's a building project, obviously, that's going to be a much longer process. So I think the question or the suggestion from Desi was, you just have to have something you default back to. You can still give yourself options, but you, just like all these other discussions, and reading that with the lens of, read it as if you never, ever heard of Triton before. You just, all these other suggestions of just make sure there's a default, so there's no questions if a decision couldn't be made.
Maureen?
I just want to go on record as just saying I think it makes sense. I don't think there's a lot
Okay.
to discuss. So.
Okay. Yeah? All right. I'm seeing nods around the table. Paul?
The DCC is the 29th or the 30th?
It's the 29th. I missed the beginning of the meeting when those dates were set. I don't know why it's on a Wednesday rather than a Thursday this time, but assuming it was
I
availability.
forget what it was. We wanted one at the end of January.
Okay.
And I forget why. It was the tentative school committee date. And as we were sitting around the table, the Thursday wasn't available and the Wednesday looked good for folks.
Okay.
So,
I just wanted to make sure.
yeah.
Okay.
And that, just so you know, that agenda will go out. It's ready with these annexes. I wanted to wait to make sure we had these documents so that we can, when we post the agenda on Monday, it will have these documents for the budget as well.
While we're on these documents, Brian, and we're talking about last year's budget and this year's budget, the document that's one page, single-sided, at the bottom says, for discussion purposes only.
Yes, I did not change that. That should be, that was last year's workshop. That should be 12520. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments before we move on? All right. I will hand it over to the superintendent then for discussion on the fiscal year 21 operating budget.
Okay, so you have 3 documents in front of you. I'm going to start with the summary. It's the largest document. So this summary document details all of the requests that you heard over last week, January 14th, 15th, and 16th. It is further refined. There are some instances where, for example, during the discussion, we had the discussion where the van leases were included in Tim Albert's request and in Dave McGee's special ed request. Those have been confirmed, the right numbers in each. So this document summarizes all of the requests and then layers in additional items that were not necessarily part of the presentations, the biggest portion of that being personnel with salaries. There are some that have been refined over since the week and a half ago, and others that still are in question. So as we go through, I will point out those that are still up for discussion. Actually, that's not the right term, that are still in flux, and there would be sunk costs that we're just waiting to hear once we have those firm. So on the first page, Newbury Elementary School's request For right now, we've got everything in the budget request. The gray box is as requested. The green is the must-do. Everything else is in TBD at this point. If we're not saying it's literally a must-do, heating of buildings, paying of salaries, healthcare, if it's not a literal must-do, then it's in the TBD category, and that's for discussion today. So at Newbury, it was a request of bringing the math specialist and a half-time custodian both to full-time, so those are 0.5 increases in each. And there was a $3,800 request for supplies. The capital costs, again, that's a discussion we have each year. Newbury does own the town, I'm sorry, yes, it does own the town as well. Newbury does own NES, and so they have a capital plan, but anything inside, if it's the fit and finish, carpets and things like that, we have historically replaced the cost, or held the cost of those replacements. So those would be valid costs that would be for us if we do want to make those repairs. I would say the restroom partitions and vents, that's actually one that it would be a question, that's an installed item versus a finish. So as we move through that process, I think as we get through this, we'll understand pretty clearly that getting to much of anything in that TBD column is going to be a challenge. So I don't think any of those will rise to a top priority. Over the page at Pine Grove School, there was a request. Yep, I was going to ask, is it easier to ask questions by school or, well, we'll do that, okay, yep.
I don't see the request that they asked for the iReady on here. Is that included in one of these other line items?
I believe that is included in the 3835. So that is the total for all supply lines, the 2,000 to 4,000, so the second line down. I can literally. Yeah, that's in the, so that's in that.
Page 7, Newbury's.
Were you seeing it down the bottom? Yes, yep. So that 3835 is inclusive of all requests.
Can you, so that total figure, 63,914,
Yes.
when I look at the Pine Grove total, 150, all those numbers add up to 150?
Yeah.
Can you tell me, Newbury Elementary, 63, how, that math just seems off to me.
It's not including the capital.
Okay,
It missed the capital costs.
all right, well, we should clarify that or do something.
Yep.
It's just,
Any other, Paul? Sorry. Oh, Deb? Sorry. I don't know who's waving at me. Somebody's waving.
Excuse me, do any of, I realize that on the surface, carpet replacement and painting and tiles appear to be cosmetic, but do any of them have any kind of a safety component? Like, are the tiles, is anybody going to trip over a tile? Or the cleanliness of a carpet? It seems like there may be a safety component, particularly in tiles.
I would say anytime you're talking about flooring, there's a safety component, yes. Anything that becomes an imminent trip hazard, we are dealing with right away. So if there's literally tiles sticking up, stair treads sticking up, we deal with those. But to say that it's an imminent danger, I don't believe any of those items are an imminent danger, no. Ideal? Absolutely not. Yeah.
Paul, did you have a question too? No. No, you were waving for Deb. All right, any other questions on Newbury Elementary? Yes, Maureen?
Brian, I just wanted to know, like, at what, where does it stand with the town of Newbury? Do they know specifically about all these items?
Again, some are in a state of flux. Anything that would be flooring, we've historically dealt with that. So those aren't on the town's radar. The town has a capital plan that they've been working kind of roof down in keeping the building on par. But I think there is an understanding, I've had conversations with Tracy Blaze, the town administrator, that the building was done in 1994, so it's approaching a need for a large-scale update. Again, it's nothing like a Pine Grove school where it's a gut and redo, but there are some major systems that are going to need to be upgraded. And it's a matter of pacing that with the discussion with the town and when the time is right.
Okay. And I do remember asking Beth about the sort of priority, and she did talk about the partitions and the vents in the bathroom as a priority, and just that there are safety issues with those partitions. So just wanted to say that. I have that in my notes.
Anything else? All right. Moving on to Pine Grove School.
So at Pine Grove, there were requests to bring the math specialist to full-time, similar to Newbury, the BCBA full-time, and increasing the custodian again there from half-time to full-time. So the total salary personnel request was 2.0, the difference being the BCBA compared to Newbury for $150,000. Obviously at Pine Grove, there were absolutely no capital requests or maintenance requests. So that was the totality of Christine's requests. Any questions on that? Pretty straightforward.
No. On to Salisbury.
So I just will note, so again, carried in the district costs is all of capital maintenance and repair, not just capital, but operations and repair. So Pine Grove's maintenance and operations costs did go up because of the contracts we talked about with all of there are actual rooftop units now that are keeping the spaces cooled and heated. So all of those systems are very modern, but obviously require contracts to keep them maintained. For Salisbury Elementary, the request was increasing the math specialist. It's actually a 0.8 increase. Social worker, for a full-time social worker, asking for a 1.0 instructional assistant, and also increasing the custodian to full-time, or one of the custodians, the half-time custodian, increasing to full-time. The math specialist increase is a combination of funds coming through Title I. That's why it's a 0.8 increase. The social worker is similar to Christine's request for BCBA. That's based on need. That Jim determined that the social worker was more the need for SES than the BCBA. The instructional assistant, I think that is generally in a state of flux. IAs tend to ebb and flow. Probably, I would say that's the most common personnel that's ebbing and flowing just based on the needs of students identified on IEPs, both increases and decreases. And then the custodian is the same. Again, the custodian's already at a half-time status. They already have benefits, so it's the cost of just bringing the salary to full-time. Supplies and service lines, again, inclusive of all of those supplies and services, is $6,500 for a total of $213,393. Any questions on Salisbury? So on to the middle school. The request was a special education teacher. We had an extensive discussion about this offline as well as at the table in regards to how that position would be used. And as Al identified, it's mental health is the greatest concern in those students who are spending considerable amount of time in student services currently, having a place for them to go and an educator to work with them, quite similar to the LIFT program at the high school, where we have a full-time educator and a full-time social worker. That is already paying for itself, if you will. The other requests, the 2,400 or the rest of the 2,000 to 4,000 series is $3,200, and then the $7,600 for the additional Chromebook carts. Those are, again, we haven't prioritized yet, but those are necessary in order to maintain the curriculum. So we'll certainly have a discussion today about the things that we need to move over. So any questions about the middle school? Nothing? All right. To the high school, Patrick requested a technology integration specialist, a technology education teacher, and again, think tech education, not technology with computers, but technology engineering, wood shop, culinary. And then, again, another, that's actually bringing an IA who's currently .85 to full-time. And then Patrick actually requested a slight decrease based on the requests in prioritizing supplies and materials. Continuing over the page for the high school, there's the ventilation repairs for the ceramics kiln. That is it's going to be a must-do. We're working with currently getting pricing on that, and the pricing is getting cheaper to the point where it may not need to be completely redone. So that's not in a must-do column because I think the repair may be considerably less, to the tune of $1,500, which would then be able to be absorbed into the repair line, the general repair line, rather than needing to call it out separately. But that does need to be done in order to continue operating the kiln. So that is the final for the high school.
Paul?
Brian, I just want to make clear, so going back up to, for instance, the Pine Grove BCBA position?
Yep.
When you say $90,000, that's not salary, correct?
That's salary and benefits,
Right, and the benefit package is almost $20,000.
$18,800. Yep. Yeah, so the figure you see, $81,533 repeated, that was another one that was refined. So that's someone that's coming in at a master's level, 6 years of experience, so master's step 6, plus a full benefits package. So that's where we arrive at that number. It's a pretty typical. If we look at where the majority of our educators lie on the salary scale, it's in the master's column, actually the top of the master's column. The BCBA is a little separate. Well, it's not. It's completely separate and a little different in that it's not, the BCBAs we hired are not necessarily within the Triton, the TRTA unit, because it's a separate field. So the salary is slightly higher than that 81, just based on the market. And we still, to hire someone at a $90,000 with a benefit package, we're saving probably 40% over what it would be to contract that person through an agency.
Erin?
So Brian, can I also ask where we're looking at personnel changes, do they all include any associated benefits adjustments that would happen if somebody was made from part-time to full?
Yes, it does. Yep, so custodians at 50%, those half-time people going to full-time, they're already benefit eligible at 50%, so it's just the salary increase. Same thing with that IA going from .85 to 1.0, there's no benefit change there. Math specialist, same thing. So if someone as a public employee, 20 hours or more makes you benefit eligible. For instructional assistants, they're not a 40-hour work week, so it's actually a .6 that makes an IA eligible. Teachers have been deemed by the state that even though it's a 35-hour work week, technically on the books, it's many hours outside, so at 50%, a teacher is eligible for benefits as well. So most of these positions, any new position, it's a full benefit package. The majority of the folks going from half-time to full-time, there's no salary. It's just salary. There's no benefits because they're already benefit eligible, and they would be taking them if they were going to.
And then just one more question, Brian. Obviously, just for the people that are listening, if a person comes on and their spouse has full coverage, then that would be a savings to the district.
Absolutely.
To the tune of almost 18.8.
Yep. And we've had the discussion over the years. It's never come to fruition, the idea of, remember this through P&N over the years, incentivizing. Many people who work in the private sector, if you don't take the benefit package, you get some amount of money as a payout. The question is, how do you phase into that and make it affordable? We modeled that probably 10 years ago, and it's a big guess, because you either grandfather people and don't give them money if they already weren't taking the benefits. The way to do it, and so it's effective, is anyone who's not taking the benefit gets some new money. So that's new monies that we would have to pay out in order to get that rolling, and then obviously you would save money for those that would choose to come off of the plans. So ultimately, long-term, it would likely save considerable money. There's just a big question about how you get that rolling and whether or not it would actually start off with an increased cost.
Other questions? Seeing none?
Okay, that was through the high school, right? So for athletics, the increase for coaches is listed as a TBD. Obviously, those are all in the TRTA contract, so that would be determined based on where the contract lands as far as any COLAs that would be applied to stipends. The rest of athletics we're putting in the must-do category. Overall, it's an increase of 13,432. You can see that the transportation, the last line, actually decreased by 16,500, because that's the amount that's being covered in the special ed line. But it also includes a couple lines ahead here. We'll see the transportation bid that was opened on Thursday. We actually had a 10% increase in our costs. So that's about 141,000 increase rather than I forget what the number was initially, 80 some odd, or 60 some odd thousand. So this transportation line, the 21,663, includes the decrease for the leases, but it includes, I think it's roughly $4,500 increase because of the contract. That was locked in not locked in. It was opened as of Thursday. NRT was the low bidder. Still going through a vetting process. There were two bidders that came to the table. Salter Transportation was $700,000 higher than NRT over the course of the 5 years. So certainly there is no competition. That's all I'll say about that. Don't love that. So that's where we landed. So just to confirm that transportation, aside from the increase for coaches, all of these are now locked for athletics. So for an increase of 13,432, that settles contracts and makes sure everything continues rolling as is. And again, that's the entirety of the increase. In the presentation, we talked about the breakdown between athletics fees and general fund. Because of where we're at, the user fees can't absorb any more increases. So these increases year over year are going to the general fund, which means that split between fees and general fund is swinging, not significantly, but there's definitely more coming out of general fund than out of user fees. It's the whole athletics. Any questions on athletics?
Maureen?
I just wanted, didn't Tim request or propose a new position for strength and training for all students?
So that's actually included. It's included in the coaching. So it's included in the total. It's actually, that line says a decrease in assistant coaches of -1. The total request the coaching line went from 154 to 145. So there was a decrease. So that included the decrease of some coaches, that assistant coach, and also the addition of, so there's still a net decrease, but one of those positions is a 3-season or strength and conditioning coach that's included in that. Yeah.
Other questions? Sorry, turn my mic off since Maureen then turned hers on. Just real quick, the new uniform rotation cycle, the dollar value has changed and it's included as a must-do. Can you just comment on that?
So that is in, sorry.
Page 7.
Yeah, so that's Included in the 28. So that's actually mislabeled. So that $900, no, I'm sorry, that's right. That the 8273 is actually all of supplies and materials.
Okay.
Yeah, that didn't get labeled correctly. My
Okay.
apologies.
So.
Lots of hands in these documents this year. So that, yeah, that should be the total increase for supplies and materials. So there's actually, the other increases, I mean, for fall supplies, so the net total, there was a $10,000 reduction in football, police detailing. So that's the total increase is the total line is 29,814, which is a net increase of 8273. But that line, I should say the cost of football uniform conditioning is a $25,000 cost.
Okay.
So that would, if we pulled that out, that line would be 17,000
Okay. And
in the negative.
what's the rationale for putting it in must-do? And I'm comparing this against Chromebook carts in the middle school.
Yep.
Because I mean, they're not
Yep,
apples to apples.
yep,
But,
I would agree with that.
okay.
That is, the uniforms, I would say the other items there, are not, I would say must do. I mean, it's just the basic cost of running, the basics, I mean, $2,000 supplies for the winter season. I mean, so it's very small amounts. But yes, I would say the 25,000 is not a must do.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Maureen.
I just want to make a comment about the uniform rotation. Having had high school students myself who have participated in athletics, I think there has been some inequities over the years about students and athletes getting uniforms. So I know my students have played on teams where the uniforms were 10-plus years old because they were never given any money for new uniforms. So I do think it does reflect on Triton when you've got kids out there in uniforms that are noticeably old and tattered. So I just think I think my understanding of the presentation from Tim was that it's a way to develop a more equitable process for students to have uniforms on a rotating basis when needed, so.
It's absolutely been small potatoes coming from district funds, and as you know, and a lot coming from boosters. So a more active booster, a sport with a more active booster has seen not annual new uniforms, but has seen fairly routine refresh on their uniforms. I think it goes to morale, it goes to team spirit, it goes to how good you feel about yourself and all these things when you're sitting in a uniform that's 12 years old. Yeah, so is it a must-do? I agree with you. It is not a must-do in the nature of it's not a sunk expense, but I do think it's an important piece, especially as we've tried to refine or been required to refine how we manage booster funds and organize booster funds and trying to get boosters to operate independently like they need to be and not through student activity accounts. And those should be supplementing, not supplying the basics. Legally, that's the requirement. So another further way that those should be separated and not relying on fundraising, because we're already charging fees of $350 per sport. So to then have it not be wouldn't it be nice to raise some funds to get some fun stuff to also, I mean, it's almost a foregone conclusion. You all know that you really have to raise funds just to get the basics. So I think that 25,000 goes a very, 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 very long way. Yeah.
Deb?
Where is the 25,000? Is that's,
So again, it's in the 28, the 8273, it says new uniforms rotation cycle. That's actually, that should say athletics, supplies and materials. So that's, this sheet doesn't replicate all the detail you have here. It's just the totals of those lines. So it's within the supplies and materials. The total increase in the line is only $8,200, but
Okay.
because of some other decreases, the 25,000.
It's
All right,
also
thank
spread
you.
over 5 years, so it should be 5,000 a year, right? Is
No.
that not accurate?
No, so the $25,000 line allows that's there every year to do a few teams each year. So basically, that allows, I think the number's 3 or 4 teams, and again, I think as Tim said, the year that football uniforms are getting replaced, there's not gonna be much else. The year that cross-country pennies or whatever, it's a very different thing. So the 25,000 would be the total ask. You wouldn't have to add anything else to that in future years. That number is there and would allow him to schedule a 5-year rotation. Yep.
Yep, Dina?
I'm a little bit torn on this one because I do agree with Maureen. Now granted, it's been years now since I've had kids playing here, but since we recognize the importance of athletics and other extracurriculars, I do think it, as you mentioned, it does play to morale and pride in your sport, in your team, and in your school. Is there any way we can maybe reduce that amount and start lower? Maybe we can't do 3 or 4 teams, of the easier ones to do, cross-country, even soccer, whatever. If we cut that budget now and still have that maybe considered, I don't know if there's any appetite for that, but I agree with Maureen. I do see that there is some value in having pride in our teams and in our school.
Can I just say, I don't disagree with that. My question is putting it in the must-do column.
I
Right.
absolutely agree with that. I think it should be lower priority, but if we're going to do that, I think even reducing it shows that we still are invested in it, but, yeah, it can't, I agree with you, Chromebooks, academics come first.
Yep. Yeah, again, the goal for today is to understand the big picture, see what the state numbers meant, and then give us guidance as far as what the priorities are. There are some things, I think, in here that can come down, some potential that could go up. The majority, other than health insurance, it should be the high water mark, and hopefully even that's a high water mark. So I think from here, if we can identify, I want to go through everything, paint the whole picture, and then kind of go back and speak through specific things like this. But I think to Narissa's point, it shouldn't be in the must-do from a technical standpoint. Significant priority, we'll talk about full-day K. Again, is that a priority, or is it we're going to have to do it anyway, so might as well get on board kind of thing? So I think those discussions have to be had. But I think technically speaking, it should definitely be in the TBD. Any other questions about athletics?
Sorry, I'm adding numbers. I might come back to it, but go ahead.
You're what?
I'm trying to do math back and forth.
Oh,
So
okay.
I might ask you to come back to it just for a quick second, but,
Yes.
to carry on, because.
Okay. So now I'm on to district-wide programs. So the biggest category, single-handedly, and not surprisingly, universal full-day K was a $75,000 request in the TBD, discontinuing parking fees, $20,000, reduction of athletics fees, $75,000, and the faculty senate stipend of $50,000. Those are all in the TBD. Again, the full-day K is a 3-year phase-in. The reduction of athletic fees would be a 4-year phase-in. So it wouldn't, we would need to be increasing those numbers for years. So the 75,000 would have to be, in fiscal '21 would have to be adding another 75, and then the year after that, another 75. And the same thing for athletics, it would be 4 years of that phase-in. We're not talking priorities yet, but I think the universal full-day kindergarten, regardless of what we believe, or what any of us individually believe about full-day K, there is legislation that will require compulsory full-day education at age 5. That's kindergarten, doesn't matter what you call it. So there's bills with language. It's not moving anywhere yet, but there's bills with language that are pushing for universal required full-day education for students age 5 and older. So it's on the horizon. Much more proactive for us to start phasing this in than to get caught in 1 year, 2 years, when all of a sudden we have to absorb $250,000 all in 1 year. So those are not required. Also, OPEB contribution, we didn't include this in a presentation. There's a placeholder there. I feel like every year we talk about this. We need to do this. You know that our Moody's bond rating is way low. It's now lower than the towns, and we have a lower rating, and we have a negative forecast. And they specifically pointed to our lack of reserves. OPEB is certainly among them. There are a lot of places that that haven't figured out OPEB. I think it would look good if we put something towards it each year. The bigger concern, as reported by Moody's, is the fact that we don't have any rainy day funds. We've never established a stabilization account. We could have a general stabilization, we could have a regional transportation stabilization, and we could have a special education stabilization account. We don't have any of those, and what we do have is excess and deficiency, and we don't have the balances that we need to have. If we were to have the recommended 3%, we'd be sitting at about 1.2 million. The cap would be closer to $2 million. And so the fact that we talked last month that we have, I guess it's in the finance subcommittee, we were certified at 417,000. There's a strong likelihood, given the way this year's gone, that we're going to use a good chunk of that to balance the budget come the end of the year. So to not have those reserves, and we've been successful in pulling it out as an assumed revenue at the beginning of the year. The next sheet I'll go over. But we still have routinely used it later in the year to close the budget. So it doesn't matter whether you're taking the vote to include it in the budget at the beginning of the year or in April when we say, it's going to be kind of tight, we need to use some E&D. You're still taking a vote to use rainy day funds, and we've done that pretty much consistently every year, given the costs that have changed during the year. Healthcare changes usually ahead of time. Special education at the costs that we do our best to control, but move-ins, move-outs, new students identified, it's just something that is universal in Massachusetts. Every school is struggling, trying to get a grasp on how to control those costs. So just to note that, OPEB, there's there as a placeholder for 25,000. I want to say Amy just got the valuation, and it's approaching 80 million, I believe. So we have a long way to go. At the $2,500 is actually the decrease in the cost for in your line, actually, in regards to the policy review. So that we paid the third year this year of that process. Increasing district-wide substitute coverage. We have this discussion every year. We tend to spend about $300,000. The budget's sitting at $275,000. Is it a must-do? It's not. Will we probably spend it? Yes, we probably will. So it's not a must-do, but certainly it's the wise thing to do to budget what we believe we will actually be spending. Next line down, bids were opened on Thursday, as I noted. The increase is actually $141,000. That's a 9.89% increase to our rates. Again, we were talking about the fact that there are other places, such as Burlington, that we're seeing a 30% increase. So it's kind of sad when we're thrilled that it's only 10%, but the $141,000, is this a good thing? I would say the good thing is that it tends to be the largest increase in a contract is when you roll into a new contract. So the way we bid it is it's a 5-year agreement, so it's a three solid years that were locked in with NRT, and then 2 bid option years. So we'll bring this to you in probably February for approval to award the contract. So we're locked for 3 years, and then there's 2 option years that it's totally at our discretion. So if we think that on that year 4 and year 5, if we think we probably could go get better rates, we're not locked into those years. But there tends to be the first year of a contract, you see a 10% increase, and then next year it goes up. I think the number's 348 for a 2-year, for a 2-tier run, and it goes to 358, then 368. We went from 317 to 348 for a 2-tier run this year alone. So this is the year where there's a big increase. I will also say NRT, the last time around, bid on midday runs, which is for half days. They bid and accidentally wrote $35 per day rather than $35 per bus per day. And they honored that. So they undercharged us by about $25,000 over the last 5 years, each year. So that was fair. That price went to $125 per bus per day, which is lower than market rate, but still fair. But they certainly, transportation is a challenge. The biggest driver and the cost for this is, and you can look at the financials, it's salaries. It's paying prevailing wage so that we can attract good drivers. We're not required to pay prevailing wage. However, out of the same terminal on Hanover Street by Newbury Elementary, the Masconomet Tri-Town district runs the buses out of that terminal, and there's a Southern New Hampshire district, I forget, all run out of that terminal. Both of those towns are prevailing wage required. So if you're a driver in the area and your boss is there and you could take a run at Masco Tri-Town or this other district or make $7-8 less an hour for Triton, pretty sure we're not gonna get the best driver. So this basically brings us competitive. We've talked about this routinely, that we're just having a hard time keeping drivers. So hopefully it's not a great number to absorb, but hopefully it will solve the issue of routinely having, spoken with many of you as parents. We have substitute drivers on a routine basis. They're just driving, all well-intended, but just driving right by bus stops with kids waving, wondering why the bus is going by. So it's not a problem unique to Triton, but while this number is not a good number, I'm actually hoping it will solve a problem that we've seen growing over the years. Yep.
So, Brian, are you saying that when we bid with, or when North Reading bids us, that the increase will actually reflect in a trickle down to the drivers of a prevailing wage? So we're actually involved in what they're getting paid, the drivers?
So we pay a flat rate. So we pay NRT for bus services. So the increase is mostly wages. So I can't dictate. So if we, and I forget all the rules with transportation, if you have an MBTA service or something like that within your community, you have to pay prevailing wage for transportation. So we don't have to pay prevailing wage. However, this was bid assuming he's paying prevailing wage to the drivers so that we can remain competitive.
But how do we know that the drivers are going to get the money? Are there representations made by NRT that they are paying close to prevailing wages or prevailing wages? Because, I mean, my question is, how do we know that this isn't ending up in the owner of NRT's pocket as opposed to transferring the funds to the drivers so that they're more competitive, so that we don't have a constant turnover of drivers?
It's not written in the contract, but most of the drivers are local, and I see them fairly routinely, and they're not shy. So, yes, it would not be, while there is no documented, if we had prevailing wage, a required prevailing wage, they'd have to submit timesheets. We don't have that requirement, so I don't have any documentation, but it would be loud and proud if folks weren't getting the rates. And they don't have to pay prevailing wage per se,
right,
but they have to pay a much more competitive rate to keep the drivers. So, in all the documents we've looked at, it's about clearly where the cost driver's coming from.
Okay, thank you.
Change of facilities cost, that's a flat, that $53,000 was the same figure. That's the collective facilities, repairs, maintenance, utilities, which again, we've been pretty good. We've been able to lock oil, natural gas, and electricity. So we've been pretty good on that regard. Retirement insurance, this is...
Excuse me, Brian,
Yeah.
can I stop you there for 1 second? I remember years ago, I don't remember how many now, with the solar panels and stuff, and we were getting all those, we're supposed to be getting rebates
Credits.
of some sort,
Yep.
the credits. Are those still being applied?
They are.
Or how does that influence this line?
So I want to say it's like 7 different owners since we partnered with True North Solar. It's off of Rabbit Road in Salisbury. We own 40%, 41% of the electricity being produced by that array. So it's actually net metered. It's not green energy, it's brown. So it's better because we're not getting the actual electrons. They're producing it, sending it to the grid. We get the credit for it on the national grid transmission bill. So what Dean is alluding to is when our rates, we sank and we're paying ridiculously low rates that we locked in for a while, and those are gone. We were accruing credits, amassing credits, because the amount we were paying and getting credits for was more than what we were actually paying. But those credits have all been drawn down, and now it's offsetting the transmission cost. So that is, I want to say that's a 20-year arrangement. And I have questions or discussions, I should say routinely, with folks who look at our roof. I think there are companies that literally just look at roofs via Google Maps, and we have a very attractive roof for a solar array. I guess I should be proud of that, I don't know. But there's been folks we've looked at with canopy in the parking lot, canopy arrays. I still think we could do turbines. That's obviously a much more controversial thing to put up a turbine. But likely, we could put up a solar array on the roof, a megawatt or more, and no one would ever even know it's there. So that's still possible. We're now into a phase or a lifespan where that roof is 20 years old, so no one wants to touch it. When there's a new roof that goes on, and it's all ballasted, nothing goes through the membrane, but once a new roof goes on, there'll be a whole lot more companies that are willing to say, okay, I'm ready to put my stuff on that roof now that I know it's not coming down in 5 years or 10 years.
So Brian, you said that's a 20-year expiration on the agreement in Rabbit Road. When does it expire?
I'd have to get that to you. I want to say we did that probably around 2010. So we're probably, I would guess offhand, we're about halfway through. Yep. I can confirm that specifically for you. Retirement and insurance, $665,000. Obviously, roughly 20 some odd percent or 25%, more than 25% of the total increase. I was holding out hope, not getting you these documents, because I was begging and pleading with our reps and our consultants to see if we could get any intel. The MMA, which Maya is part of, annual meeting is this weekend. This weekend they will set the range. So everyone will renew between 0 and 15, 0 and 10, 5 and 20. We will know by next week, we'll know the range and the average. We won't have our rates probably until after probably the tentative budget. It's generally the mid-February is the earliest we've seen those. Sometimes we've begged, pleaded, and our consultant can be, I guess, annoying enough to Maya to get them to leak a little bit. But I was hoping to get just a hint of the range. You remember I reported to you that we have extraordinarily high claims. Our loss ratio right now is 100%. So every dollar that Maya is collecting in premiums, they are paying out in claims. So we can assume our rates are going up. We're carrying a 10% increase right now. However, one of the benefits of being part of a trust is that when you have bad years, the bad is spread across all the members. So if they come out with a range of 0 to 8, we know we won't be any higher than 8. So at least we'll know the high-end range. If they come out and say it's 2 to 15 and the average is 10.5, I'm not going to feel great about the 10%, because my guesses will be higher than the average, but probably not at the top end. So hopefully we'll have some intel. I was looking for something, holding out hope late into the evening last night that I would get that magic email, but it didn't happen. So right now we are carrying 10%. That 665 also, you remember, again, it's not detailed here, but in your documents, $168,000 increase for Essex Regional Retirement, which is a very, very high number. We've historically seen multiple double digits or 5-digit numbers, but it's kind of grown over time, and it's routinely 6 figures, and it seems to be approaching 200,000. So it's a set schedule. There's no funny business. It's just the nature of an aggressive funding schedule that Essex County has established for its members. We're roughly 3.1%, I believe, of the total assessment. That's how that figures out. And again, Essex County is the retirement system for everyone not in mass teachers. So if you hold a professional educator license through the Department of Ed, you retire through Mass Teachers, MTRS. If you do not have a license, you retire through Essex County. The state matches the 11% that we're all contributing for MTRS. We as a district and the towns pay the 11% match for everyone not in MTRS. So that's where that figure comes from. School choice is a figure that stayed the same. I actually disaggregated those. The charter tuitions, I'm still waiting to get some clarity. The increase this year was offset by a much higher reimbursement rate. So the supplemental budget for fiscal 19, as well as some language in fiscal 20, provided some additional remedy or relief. So right now, if you look on our cherry sheet, the charges are $800,000 and change for charter students, and it's 57 students. We currently have 55 there, I believe is the number. We're currently getting about $204,000 in revenue, so you get offsetting, that's the word I'm looking for. You get charges and reimbursement. Thank you, I was saying refund, that didn't sound right. Right now on the cherry sheet, it's showing about 80,000. So I'm trying to get a clarification in the sheet. If it gets fully funded, that 80,000 turns into close to 200, about 189,000. There was some additional fiscal 20 money, some creative, if you have a certain, I'm not going to go into them, if you go into a certain range of how many you have there, at least 25% increase, we got additional funds. So right now, that's assuming only 85,000. So it's a charge of 800,000. We could get another 100,000 in relief in charter, which would take that 111,000 down to a much flatter, possibly no increase at all. So still watching that. We have to wait both, for some clarification from DESE, that they would be able to tell me now, and I didn't hear back by yesterday, and then also as the budget process goes through, specifically how much that's funded, because that's separate from Chapter 70. There's certain calculations within the formula, but this is separate, and whether they're funding the total reimbursement for charter school, the reimbursement portion. We always get all the charges. We don't always get the reimbursement that they promise. Does that make sense? Because it's confusing. The next 4 lines are lines that you have not seen, and obviously it represents over $1 million, so it's a significant portion. I am carrying right here a single COLA line and a single step line. I am not telling you percentages. I'm not giving you anything else beyond that. And I'm doing that purposefully because the PNN and obviously the committee is in the process of negotiating contracts. There are assumptions made. Certainly in executive session, we can talk about specific levels if we want to adjust that. But for right now, publicly, those are placeholders for COLAs for everyone, whether bargaining unit or not. And then steps are all the steps that are required of any of our 5 collectively bargained agreements. Again, in Massachusetts, even if a contract expires, we're required to provide steps. So if I'm a 7th-year teacher and we say we didn't settle the contract before September 1st of next year, I still go to step 8 next year. Other states, that's not the case. You can hold everything, but it's been fairly well adjudicated that if there's a contract, the contract doesn't go away at midnight on the last day. You still follow the contract. It would be the COLA, the increases, that wouldn't happen. So we've carried as a must-do all of those the step movement, the COLA of 529,000. That is certainly a number that can fluctuate and likely will fluctuate, and that as we have those discussions as we move further through the process. Column movement, you remember last year, if you look, I forget the exact number, it was a very high number. We put columns into the contract for IAs 3 years ago. We allowed people to get credits, what are we calling them? Professional development, not PDPs, there's something, we had to create a new word. So they can make movement across with additional trainings and courses or professional development. So there was significant movement in those first couple of years. Last year, I want to say the number was 171,000. This year, it was much less, so the total increase would be 31,000 for anyone that told us. IAs and teachers are required to tell us by December 15th if they intend to have enough credits or points to make lateral movement into a new column for next September. So that's a much lower number. And then the salary reserve, that's the amount of 115,761 is currently 19,000 and change sitting in that line on a payroll of roughly $26 million. Carrying 135,000 is basically 0.5%. Things happen. It's not, this line is rarely used to add. The only time it's used to add, I would say, we mentioned earlier, instructional assistance. If an IEP team determines we have a new student coming out of early intervention, requires a one-to-one, when we have to put a new instructional assistant into place, the salary reserve is the only line that we have to either adjust for increases that may not be, we assume a master's step 6, someone might come in at a master's 30, step 5, and that's more money. So that reserve just offsets that. But just so you know, that $115,000 increase brings it to a $135,000 line. And that is the only discretionary funds that we have in regards to roughly $26 million in salaries.
Brian, can I just add, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that this is 0.5%? In the past, we have had that at 1%, is that correct?
I'd say 15 years ago, when I took this process over, it was always the 1%.
Right, so.
1% is a different term now. So that was the 1% then. Now it's a 0.5%.
Right. The point being is that we are
Yes.
close to the line.
Yep.
Thank you.
And it's generally been 100, 125. And so that's been the line, and then it's, the percentage is what has changed. And you see this, in long ago in a land far away, this was a buried line, so lines were inflated just to have some cushion. This is in the budget, so anyone can watch it. The Finance Subcommittee can see that, and you all can, on a monthly basis, because that's a carried line.
Questions?
Absolutely.
Questions on this section? Linda?
Did I hear you say that one of these lines is for the policy, the recurring policy amount?
The $2,500 reduction up top. So that's the current fiscal 20, I forget the total cost, it was roughly 10,000, I think 10,500. It was, we weren't paying a hosting fee, so we paid the 10,000 for the process to review. That was broken up into 3,500, must have been, yeah. So it must have been 10.5, because that was broken into 3,500 a year for 3 years, paying the final year this year. And now, next year, that cost goes away and there's a 900 and change fee to host on their site.
Okay, you know where I'm going with this,
Yes, I do.
because we just had a huge update that we saw on listserv, and with us paying for this service, something has to be, I know that you sent a letter to them, which I thought was appropriately written, but they have to have some accountability that, what if we weren't part of the listserv? We wouldn't have known that all these changes to the policies were being done. So I'm not sure what it is that we can do to hold them accountable for this, that if we're not receiving the updates, we should get the hosting thing free.
Yeah, just to clarify on that one, so what actually happened was, so we host our policy manual through MASC. They did our policy review for us on, I don't even know what that was, Monday, Tuesday, somewhere in there. MASC has a general listserv that's any school committee member can sign up for it. Even if you've previously been a school committee member, there's a lot of retired school committee members, life members, things like that stay on there even afterwards. There were 3, 4 policy updates that were sent out via the listserv that we were not notified of through our hosting mechanism. So we were not notified that those happened. If I hadn't been on the listserv and caught that and sent that on to Linda and Brian, I don't know when we would have been notified that those policies were updated. Yet we have our hosting service through them. So, yes,
Can I ask a question? So has there been any contact with MASC?
Yeah, so Brian immediately reached out because he wanted to see if we could, A, why it hadn't happened, and B, what they sent was just an update. So it was hard to determine easily determine what was different between the existing policies that we had and the new ones that they were sending out. And in addition, there was one that was slightly changed on the lettering system, the identifying lettering
Changed,
system. And it was unclear whether it was replacing an existing policy or in addition to an existing policy. So we did get quick reply on all of those answers, but we're continuing to ask the question of why we were not notified.
And my basic request was, you sent out 4 Word documents. All you had to do was turn on track changes and send out the red line. And instead, Anne Marie, who responded, is very responsive. As a general rule, MASC is responsive to committee members, not necessarily to the superintendents that you employ.
And I'm happy to fight that one back with Glenn if I need to. I've actually been corresponding with him on other things, but I didn't feel like we had quite hit that point yet. So should we hit that point?
You could apply pressure.
Yes, we could apply pressure, exactly. Linda?
However, if this is being part of our budget, we want to make sure that the services we're getting are appropriate.
Absolutely. Yes, and to be fair, it was not my understanding, the policy group within MASC that sent that out, it was a field rep. So I almost wonder if they even were floating it internally amongst the field reps, and he took a step that he should not have. So I don't know for sure, like, we haven't gotten any information on what went on behind the scenes, but it was, if there was something official coming out, it's not who I would usually expect to see it from. And other questions on district-wide programs before we go on? All right, seeing none?
Okay. So on the back of that page, district-wide special education, as David requested, the adjustment to basically making it a full-time ETC at each school. We currently have a half-time at each school. In summary, we're basically making each school have a full-time ETC. Those costs have been refined to be actually representative of what it would be exactly, and that would be $260,233. Again, significant priority, but not a must-do. Special education tuitions, that's actually down $174,597. So that is good news. That is, let's be real, the only benefit that Triton will see from the Student Opportunity Act is the changes with circuit breaker. So this does not reflect any new circuit breaker money based on the fact that we're going to get reimbursed for transportation. So that is, I've been emailing with Jay Sullivan, and he believes that the number funded will fund the transportation reimbursement. I'm not seeing that that's high enough. He's saying it's in there. We also don't know the exact mechanism, other than the fact he told me it would not be claimed along with tuitions and services. So on Friday, the 7th, there'll be a workshop at the Valley Collaborative that I know, Dave, you were intending to go, and Kyle doesn't know this yet, but I was going to have Kyle go to learn exactly how we would get that money back. We don't know. I mean, projecting, we can claim over 4 years, we can claim our transportation costs for out-of-district special education services, and we would get 75% of that back. If they're not combining it with the services and tuitions, then I don't know what the threshold would be. That would be great if they said all of your transportation is reimbursable. We'll find that out. But if it was added to the student rate, we came up with something in the vicinity of $400,000 potentially if it was fully funded. So the first year we can claim 25% of total costs, then we can claim 50%, then 75%, and then 100% by 2025. Well, fiscal 25. So that's still an unknown, so that could, again, decrease this additionally. But this is based on the fact that they set the threshold at the current year's rate, so $45,793. Anything above that amount is what we get reimbursed on at a full 75%. So the budget does carry a full 75% reimbursement right out of the gate, which is nice, rather than fighting about this for the next 3 months. So this assumption of 174,000 down changes nothing in regards to the figures that David talked about for tuitions, where students are, the number of students. There are still students who are in a state of flux that we might be able to pull out in regards to moves, age outs. There've been some assumptions that by the time we get to March 11th, I think is the date, March 12th, when we're finalizing the budget, we will have a little more clarity, or should have a little more clarity. So that could potentially come down a little more. We don't believe so, right? I think that Dave keeps saying this is the absolute high water mark as we know it right now. And right now it's assumed anyone we know about that's on the radar is assumed here. So that is a figure that will hopefully trend down. We're not going to drop it $500,000, but some will come down hopefully further. Special education transportation as well. There may be some savings there. We're continuing to refine that at this point, leaving it there as a high water mark. So unlike last year, where we didn't have a huge increase in medical insurance because you had negotiated with the PEC, it was actually a savings there. We had a massive increase in special education. It's the exact opposite this year. We actually are seeing a savings in special education, and then the big cost driver this year is the health insurance. To note, the significant costs this year that we're dealing with and will put us into deficit, the question is how far, those significant costs are helping next year because we're going to get reimbursed through circuit breaker. If those costs go away, we then don't get the reimbursement the following year. So it's a tough year this year, makes for an easier year next year, and then the question is, if that goes away, that could then turn around and make it harder in fiscal '21. So circuit breaker is a good thing, but it's not a stable revenue source. So the fact that the only relief we're getting through the Student Opportunity Act is through circuit breaker it's inconsequential as far as something that the 9 of you can count on and say, with confidence, we'll be able to receive this benefit. It's going to ebb and flow year over year. So, any questions about special education?
Deb?
It's not just special education, but I don't see anywhere in here a legal line for legal services, and obviously we have a budget for that.
Yep. So this is
that
just
included anywhere?
Yep. So that's included in the overall. That's in the main line. So in the total services, we didn't increase those. So that's in the district line. We carry all legal services, and that $2,500 decrease is the only thing that's changing. So that's everything from HR payroll services, legal is staying the same. Yep. Again, that can change. Everything can change.
Other questions? And so I'm just going to make the comment here because I think it bears saying that all of the work that Brian did during the Student Opportunity Act last year, when he was screaming about the threshold changing,
Speaking loudly.
The original special education circuit breaker was based on if the threshold was calculated the old way, because we weren't sure at that point how it was being calculated. The savings that you're seeing here with this line going down, that's calculating with the new threshold. So this is literally district advocacy, superintendent advocacy, pulling down that line. And I know I've had this conversation with many taxpayers in the town of Raleigh about, if a construction cost, a construction debt is paid off and it was done through a debt exclusion, why don't their taxes literally go down the next year? It's just that your taxes go up less than they normally would. Mm-hmm. Same effect here. There's no guarantee that we would see a drop in special education costs, right? You do, just because, but they go up less than they normally would because we're seeing that threshold kick in. So, just a nod to Brian there, because you were screaming. And it was a ton of work, and I think that bears
Thank you.
recognition that that, you know, it was a lot of footwork, it was a lot of work, it was a lot of standing there and standing your ground and saying, no, I'm not backing down on this. I know I'm right, and this needs to change.
You make me sound like a spoiled brat,
Well,
and I'm happy to be.
some days. But, you know, otherwise we could be seeing that huge hike here instead.
Well, it was not me alone. Thank you for that. But I know you were very, very involved, and actually, we'll give a shout out to our North Shore Roundtable of Superintendents, who we were royal pains in the backsides, and our legislators listened. Obviously, they don't have, being in the minority, they don't have the strongest voice as far as what they can completely affect, but they got things done. And it was, again, I would love to be seeing the, whatever it is, $10 million increase that Boston's seeing in their Chapter 70, or Methuen or Haverhill, and Beverly got another $1 million. You know, it'd be great to be getting those numbers, but knowing that wasn't the reality, I'm glad we got something.
Yes. Yeah, and kudos to our legislators too,
Yes.
since this was known as the Triton issue.
Okay, moving on to district-wide curriculum instruction. ELL services was $2,000, and then instructional materials and text, that $28,256. I would say this to you, is it a must-do? It is not. Is it a high priority? Absolutely, because it allows us to implement the new curriculum that we are required to do. Is that a fair summary?
That is fair.
Yeah, so that would certainly be up there as a significant priority as well. Over the page, we have technology. Deb was asking for a technology integration specialist, a little different than the educator that Patrick was looking for at the high school level. Again, that same 81,533. Decrease in the lines for the contract, the total services and supplies of $7,200. So the net request there was 74, and the must-do is actually a savings of $72,000. So the bottom line is a 2.139 increase as the must-dos. Obviously, we talked about, I think the only thing we talked about taking out of that as a must-do was the uniforms, correct? So that becomes 114, right? 024, if you take 25,000 out of that. 5, yeah. So that really would adjust to $2,114. In the grand scheme of things, as far as the way this plays out, that's not going to be a significant number for modeling what I'll show you on the next couple pages. So any questions about the summary of all of the costs, the requests and the sunk expenses, the things that will likely be variable in the coming weeks and months before I go to the next two sheets?
Paul does.
So Brian, just that bottom line of 3474, that still needs to be increased by the capital in Newbury?
So that would increase, yes. So I went, was that about, so 20, 30, 35, so it's roughly 40, 43, about 43,000? Thank you for reminding me of that. Okay, so I think you're probably all going to want to take a break, but why don't I go through the next couple sheets, and then that might be a logical point to pause. So if you take the next, it's 2 pages stapled back to back. Let's start on the back. Let's go backwards. So the capital assessments is positive news. Fiscal 20 was the last, fiscal 19 was the last payment for Salisbury Elementary School. Fiscal 21 will be the last payment for this campus. So you can see the total debt service is 1297 there at the top left box. We'll get 1197 from the state. So the only amount that we're assessing, the balance of what we're assessing for this building to the towns is 100,292. So that goes down significantly. The stadium project remains. There obviously is no MSBA reimbursement to that. That fluctuates by thousands up, down each year just based on the debt schedule, but that is a schedule that the towns have. Nothing on this back page is a surprise to the towns because the towns have had, obviously this project, they've had the debt schedules for 20 years, and then obviously we refunded the debt about 7 years ago, and so they have all of those schedules. So just to point that out to you, that's the calculation driving the front page. If you go back one page, there's no page numbers on this, but it would be page 3, gives you a sense of our enrollment change. Last year, our foundation enrollment, I should say the current year, was 2,308. Looking to the foundation enrollment that will be used for next year's calculation, it's actually 2,290. So it decreased 18 students. If you look on the state pages, it's 17 students, so I guess they refined that to 2,307 for last year. And if you look at the changes for each town, Newbury went down, is that 17? 8 students. Rowley went down, dropped 15 students. And Salisbury went up 5 students. Yeah.
I thought Salisbury went up 6 and Newbury went down.
I think that they refined Salisbury in the number to 895, not 896, because it's off by 1 student. That 1 student isn't gonna change anything. So what it does is, if you look at the numbers above, so the 657, the 732, the 901 for a total of 2290 is definitively the foundation enrollment for next year. If you look at those calculating boxes and shows the history, going from fiscal 20 to 21, Newbury dropped from 28.81% to 28.69%. So they lost about 0.1% of the pie, right? Because this is about changing numbers. It's not the numbers necessarily, it's the proportions. This was everyone's favorite thing in math, is proportions. So it's the change, and less change means a bigger swing. So the fiscal for Rowley, they changed from 32.37% of the pie, if you will, to 31.97. So they lost 0.4% of the total district share of the budget. And then Salisbury increased from 38.8 to 39.34. So they gained over 0.5% of the total district budget. So where last year, any of the calculations, they owed 38.8% of the budget, they're now paying for 39.34% of the budget in any of those things that are straight enrollment. So those, as we were coming into this, looking over the last 2 years, Doris and I have had a lot of discussions. We were afraid it was going to be a lot worse than that, just because of the minimum locals. These numbers drive the minimum local contributions. That number the numbers stayed fairly static, but the percentages did change. If you go to the next page, page 2, you arrive at the calculation. So the second box down where it shows the minimum local contributions, Newbury, Rowley, and Salisbury's local contributions collectively are $21,700,530. That only changed by about
$600,000.
$600.
Oh,
Yeah,
$600.
yeah, literally, like within hundreds of dollars, the minimum locals didn't change, which there was a potential that,
The split didn't change, I believe. Minimum locals changed. It was the way they were split up.
so there it is.
Hard to print it.
Yeah, I have to go back and look, but the minimum locals are 21.7. So I can go back when we break and look at the exact, but it didn't change. There was a concern with the way that the foundation formula changed, that our towns would be very disproportionately affected by the way the new formula would be funded. So the good thing is that didn't happen, at least on paper. I actually was accidentally substituting everyone's foundation budget for their MLC in this formula, and then went back and looked. It changed by literally $172. So it's a good thing, whether we like the 2.1 million or not. It's a good thing that it wasn't we feared far more catastrophic swings where we had for every $1 million, one town was picking up 900,000 of it. So that's at least a positive, but
It's not good.
it's not good. No.
But it's not as bad as we feared.
Right. So last year, 11.5 million of our budget was above minimum local contributions. This year, if you look there, it's 12.97% of the total budget is above everyone's minimum. So the back page is a calculation for capital. The numbers, the student enrollment is what drives the capital assessment, as well as that amount above minimum. And then if you go to the front page, you can see where this ultimately lands. So in the top box, it says FY21 discussion. It is the FY20 adjusted, as Paul noted earlier. That is the latest budget that you approved that we're operating under now. So the 2139024 matches the bottom of the last sheet we went over. Obviously, those a couple things need to be adjusted, but that 2139024 is the total increase. It represents a 5% increase in our spending. If you continue on down, the capital is the next line. It's a decrease in assessment of $68,500 to the member communities. Again, that's great news, but that's not a shock. They know that, and so they've been planning for that reduction all along. In the green box, as far as our revenues, for right now, we're using the cherry sheet figures, and then assuming $20,000 for homeless transport reimbursement, and we end up getting $20,865 more for regional transportation. That's a number that has historically done better as the year goes on, as the budget process goes on. We got significantly more in the supplemental budget that we'll get in fiscal 20, and that will filter through to E&D. So it would be great if everyone could get on the same page and give us that number up front so we could actually count it as a fiscal 21 revenue in fiscal 21 and not have to play the catch-up game later. But for right now, it's only a $20,000 increase. Interest income, that had historically been $50,000. In the adjusted budget, we increased that to $90,000. And speaking with Amy at the Finance Subcommittee this past week, she thinks that $75,000 is going to be the sweet spot in regards to what we'll actually get for interest on our funds that's held. We don't tend to hold funds very long. We get a monthly assessment from the towns. She does move them within money markets and tries to be as aggressive as she can. She's not putting it on Wall Street, but she is trying to use CDs when possible, and certainly money markets to get the most return. But we're going to adjust that down to 75. That's a decrease of 15,000. We got that's showing Chapter 70 again. We're minimum, right? I think I saw the figure 58% of the state saw absolutely nothing from the Student Opportunity Act. So now the fun will begin, because now the people will actually believe what we've been saying for the last 3 years, that we're not going to get anything. We're not going to get anything. So anyway, so we got the minimum. It shows a $91,770 increase. The actual increase is $68,700 because we didn't adjust any revenues in the adjusted budget. And when we finalized the budget last year, we ended up getting another roughly 23, right? We're getting 68 and that shows 91. So another $20,000 in Chapter 70 that we didn't know about when we finalized the budget on March 15th. Again, for this year, that $20,000 delta, if it takes us over our total anticipated revenues, gets filtered through to excess and deficiency, and it's all line item detailed, so that's certainly money that we knew and we could watch. Medicaid reimbursements, I hope to be able to refine this more. This is still, you talk to some people and someone says, hey, you seen all that new money because of Medicaid? And all of our discussions have been, it's like an act of Congress to try and claim all of this money. So that in recent weeks, actually, just yesterday, I saw an email, I don't remember who it was through, Mass Health or UMass, in regards to them hearing that there's some concerns about how this is claimed and the resources and what it's taking to actually try and get this money. So we'll continue to refine this. We're anticipating we'll probably be down at least 50,000. If we, in the coming months, get a good sense that we're going to get that this year, then we can take that back up to 200,000, maybe even higher. I don't think so. But I think at this point, it's prudent to pull 50,000 out of that expectation, because that's probably what we're assuming right now, where we would land for this year. So all in, our revenue increase on a 5% increase of $2.1 million between the state and Medicaid and all of the other aid that we as a district receive, we'll see an increase in our revenues of $47,000. Certainly not the windfall that Christian Wade keeps writing about in the Boston Globe and keeps getting picked up by the Newburyport Daily News in regards to new education funding. So if you take that, net off that small increase in revenue, that means we're assessing the town's $34,674,662, which is a 6.42% increase. Bears reiterating, we say this every year. We probably say it about 150 times every year. There's a difference between our increase in expenditures and our increase in assessments to the towns. We cannot control how we assess the increase to towns. We have one option in our regional agreement, and it's the statutory method. It's driven by state figures. Until we have an alternative assessment, that is the only option we have. If we have an alternative option, it gives us another tool in the toolbox. It doesn't have to be decided. There's no default. We can always default back. There is a default. We would always default back to the statutory method. But if working with the towns, it makes more sense to have whatever creative solution we come up with. Every year we make that decision, and we can make the decision what's in the best interest of towns. If we can't agree, it defaults back to the statutory method. So right now, that figure, the delta between 6.42% and 5.04%, that 1.4% delta, that's out of our control. We can obviously control the 5%, right, to some degree. I would argue that there are a lot of things we can't control, but there are absolutely things we can control in regards to our expenses. We cannot impact how that delta happens between our expenditures and the increase in assessment unless we can come to an agreement about an alternative assessment. So that said, the increase to towns ends up being, out of the 2,139, ends up being $2,091,000. And you can see at that figure where we are today, Newbury's assessment would go up $563,000 for an increase of 6%. Rowley's increase would be $533,000 for an increase of 5%. And Salisbury's increase would be $994,000, almost $995,000, an increase of 7.86%. Down the bottom of the page, you can see Newbury's capital assessment goes down 19.7, Rowley's 22,000, and Salisbury's 22,600. Again, that's less money being assessed. That's already calculated in all of the towns. They've already got that calculated in regards to their outgoing costs. So that's not necessarily relief from the operating expenses for the towns. Before I ask any questions, or answer, no, I don't ask questions. Before I answer any questions, if we just go to the last sheet, just to give you a scenario, or paint this scenario. First of all, yes, to correct what, I think it was Paul that noted, that note on the bottom should be updated. That's last year's workshop. It should say 1/25/2020. So the purple box at the top mirrors the page I just explained to you, that if we carried this exact figure forward, it would be the 6.42% increase with the corresponding increases to the towns. This just paints scenarios. These are not suggestions. These are not recommendations. These are simply discussion points so that you have a frame of reference in regards to the discussion moving forward. If we were to add $250,000, you can see where those increases would lie. Newbury would go from 563 to 635. Rowley would go from 532 to 612, and Salisbury would go from almost 995 to $1,093,000. That's if we added. Now we go the other way. If we reduced the current by $250,000, Newbury goes down to 491, Rowley down to 453, and Salisbury down to 896. Reduction of $500,000, Newbury down to 420, Rowley down to 373, Salisbury down to 798. Reduction of $750,000, Newbury down to 348, Rowley down to 293, and Salisbury down to roughly $700,000. So by cutting $750,000, and then getting Rowley, they're right, we keep saying this, every town wins some year, and it fluctuates which town wins. To get one of the towns into a 2% realm of an increase, we'd have to cut $750,000 off of this budget, and it still puts Salisbury at 5.5% increase. So, a lot of work to do, a lot of discussion to be had. I'll leave it at that. Happy to answer questions.
Any questions for Brian? Paul?
Brian, can we go to the back page that deals with capital assessments?
Yep.
And so this $100,000 total assessed to the communities?
Yep.
Has that figure been constant going back 2, 3, 4, 5 years roughly?
That actually is lower. It's because it's the final year. Generally, the last payment, but they've known that last payment.
I know that.
Yep.
But it's still less money they have to pay. I know that they've known it and the
Yep.
schedule's been there and they're
Yep.
aware of it, but
Yep.
tell us, if you will, 2, 3, 4 years back, what was the average assessment amount? If you can.
I can give you, hang on one second. So for the fiscal 20, on the fiscal 20 adjusted, I don't have the comparison over the years, but if you look at the front page, so the assessment will be, oh, you can see it right there. So you can see it's a decrease of 20 for Newbury, 22 for Rowley, 27-ish, 26.6 for Salisbury. If we went back, I'd have to pull up the fiscal 19 budget. That was a decrease, and then this is another decrease, and then it fades. It was, I don't want to speak out of turn. It's decreased down, absolutely. But it's been decreasing over the last couple of years of the loan. That's pretty standard on the note. It doesn't just, 400,000 and then zero. It's not like a mortgage with a fixed rate.
Okay. And then, Brian, on this back page where you gave us these different scenarios, current level services,
Yep.
addition of $250,000. So that addition of $250,000, that boxed out area, what that really means is that the things that people have asked for in this budget development process comes to about 1.2 million above and beyond the must-dos. So with that $250,000, that's only 1 in every 5 requests would be covered.
That's fair.
I mean, that's $1 for every 5, 1 out of 5.
As I
That's
was-
all that covers.
Yep. As I was putting the sheet together, I was looking at it, and it's always been level and then cut and then cut. I'm like, you know what? We have to look at, right? I'm not saying, again, this is not a recommendation, but you have to look at the other way. So that's a first to have an increase of $250,000 just modeled out. But absolutely, yes, that would represent about 1 in 5 or 20% of the actual requests that have been made. And again, we had this discussion as a leadership team yesterday. These were not pipe dream requests. I mean, if we said, okay, in an ideal world, not even ideal, not a perfect, but in what we should be doing, that would at least double, if not triple, as far as requests. The requests that came forward, especially when we're talking BCBAs, special education teachers, are filling a current need. Instructional technology people, there's a need. Is it as critical? I would say probably it's hard to prioritize and say literally providing services versus being proactive. But the reality is, if we want to maintain a current education for our students, if we want our students to be in an educational system that mirrors at all, even remotely, the world that they're walking into, those are all a must. And then hundreds of thousands, if not millions, beyond.
And then the other point I just want to make, Brian, is that this 2.1 million of must-dos
Yep.
is very flexible.
Is flexible?
It is. I mean, it's got teacher salaries in
Okay,
there.
yeah,
It's got
yeah,
insurance
yeah,
in there.
yeah.
I mean, that number could go up, it could go down.
Yeah, I would say to you,
I mean, those are must-do categories.
Yep.
But the numbers that are
Yep.
contained within the must-dos
Yep.
are flexible.
absolutely,
And
yep,
it's really very early for any of us to really
yep.
clamp down on that or, take a position on that.
Yep.
Our goal really in this workshop is just to get feedback, give you feedback about what our interests are.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, the keys, the things that have been locked up, transportation's now locked up, so we know that. That charter number is a moving target. Special education tuitions and transportation is a moving target. We believe it's a high water mark, and I feel good that it could come down somewhat. Again, not $500,000, but could 50,000, 100,000 come out? Absolutely. I think choices is solid based on what we have right now. I have to go back through the list to go through. But yes, the ones that we noted as in flux, the majority of that list is locked, but there is potentially 100, 200, 250, 300,000 that could go swing. And I'm hoping better, not worse. But by the time, so the next discussion we're going to have is, other than today, is on February 5th. So we're not going to come back with a budget, right? We're going to talk today, we're going to go back and do work and come back with maybe another nice summary sheet that just says kind of current thinking. And again, talk priorities before we put in front of you a full tentative budget on the 12th. We have to be confident. Again, I think, Narissa, you said it last week, the last time we met. There's nothing statutorily or per the regional agreement that says it's the high water mark. But to be good players, we've always said that is absolutely the high water mark. So we want to further refine and make sure it really is the high water mark for everything we can possibly determine at that point in time.
Deb?
So none of these scenarios include any of the must-dos as such, right?
So the box at the top, purpley blue, that's the must-dos.
Oh, it is,
Yeah,
okay. Well,
yep.
because level services, all right, that doesn't.
So, I'm sorry, yes, so I'm using must-dos and level services interchangeably.
Okay,
Yep, so we're not adding a position, so that's why, again, back to the definition of uniforms. Real high priority, it's not a level service, but everything basically in that must-do column, pulling out the uniforms, is a level service. It's taking the cost of what we do today and bringing it forward into fiscal '21.
Any other questions for Brian right now on everything he's presented thus far? All right, it's 10 o'clock. I'm going to suggest we take a 10-minute break because I know I could definitely get up and stretch my legs. So if we can start back at roughly 10 past 10? All right, thank you. All right, if we can come back to order. You guys ready? Yeah? Ready? Everybody ready? All right. Yeah, I know, warming up, exactly. Okay. So we've reviewed the costs of required increases and proposed new spending. So moving on to item 3, to consider any additional adjustments to spending as may be proposed by the school committee or the superintendent. I'm going to guess the superintendent has put in, oh, yes. So, school committee, I will open it up. Linda, thank you for breathing the brave first one.
I believe that all the schools other than Newbury has the, I could be wrong, has the iReady for the math. I would like to see that Newbury has the same as the other 2 schools for assessing children for their math.
So they want to do some more piloting of the iReady math, and have some further discussions around what are the benefits of it, what are the drawbacks, because they have a benchmark assessment in place right now. So I think to be strategic in making sure that it's the right fit for them would be a good choice at this point. But we do have, each one of them does have money to support iReady for math for a small pilot, a couple grades to pilot with discussions.
Okay, then if they have it in their budget, why would they
So
request it?
some of them have been using Dibbles math. So they just switched out it's Web's AIM, but it's under Dibbles. So they've switched out what they've used from one benchmark assessment and used that benchmarking money towards the iReady piece of it. Now, with that said, it may or may not be a little bit more costly, depending on whether they do the benchmarking and the additional layer of the instructional piece, but that is still yet to be determined after they do the full pilot and have some conversations.
Okay, another question then.
Yep.
The Salisbury and Rowley, I won't say Raleigh, I'll say Pine Grove, use the iReady math.
Yes, for some of their grades. So Pine Grove is using it this year, and I want to say Salisbury is going to be piloting next year. And Salisbury has a little bit more flexibility because they have additional funds that they can supplement iReady and expand their pilot to include as many grade levels that they can.
With the math MCAS scores that we've had, I know that everybody wants to do more assessments to make sure everybody's getting to where they need to be.
Yep.
I just want to make sure that when all is said and done with all the piloting, that we're going to one assessment and that we don't have, again, 3 different assessments.
We will not. That caused a lot of issues and concerns. And I can tell you, yesterday we met with the math specialist and we met with the high school and middle school teachers regarding an accelerated math class starting at 7th and 8th, and we talked about some different assessment tools that we would use, and we all agreed it has to be the same assessment tools. And they were looking at and doing it this spring, the iReady math, to get some good information regarding Math 3 standards.
Okay, getting back to the budget. So you're not recommending that we give any money to Newbury because they can afford to use?
Yes, they are doing what they want to do, and they have the money to support it from taking funds from one benchmark assessment in the area of math and using those to support the pilot, the small pilot that they have. Yep.
Can I make a, so I don't think this will be popular with the principals. So it's been a few years since we kind of recalibrated supplies. If you break down the per student line, or the per student amount that each principal has for supplies and materials, actually Newbury's disproportionately higher now, and Salisbury's disproportionately lower as an amount per student. So we had recalibrated that, I don't remember the year, 5-6 years ago, and then we've been adding as needs have arisen on certain areas. So I would just say this, I wouldn't consider any supply, when we talk about implementing a curriculum, that 28,000 that Kim's carrying, that's not anywhere, right? That's a need, that's a new cost. Anything else within the schools, I believe there's money that could be reallocated and reprioritized in order to achieve whatever it is we needed. As Kim described, we're moving towards a standard assessment platform in iReady, or whatever the one is for mathematics. So that can all be achieved, I believe, within the supply lines as they exist without any adjustment.
Just a quick question. So Kim's 28,000 is not in a must-do?
Not currently.
All right. I just want to make sure.
Again, so we defined a must-do as, which is why we took uniforms out, as literally a sunk cost that we're committed to, right? We're committed to salaries, and we have to make some assumptions for negotiating, healthcare, all those things. It's literally things we're committed to. Sorry.
That particular thing. I know where there was extra, I'm not saying extra money, make that clear, not extra money, but some money was given back to the schools through the general fund for activity accounts. That was extra in the accounts. Could that money that was given back to the schools, that could be used for some of this stuff that they're using?
It cannot, sorry, it was mid-bite. So that has to be used only for activities. So it was
Okay.
generated for activities, so it has to be outside the regular day, outside regular programming.
Okay, I just want to make sure that's
Yeah.
Yep.
publicly clear.
Yes, correct.
So I think we had a more extensive conversation on this in Finance Subcommittee, but I believe kind of where we landed was if it's regular day, it has to be seen as an enrichment activity, so they could have it in an assembly, right? Otherwise, it has to be seen as a true extra beyond the day. Deb?
I feel like I've said this before, or somebody said this before, but the items such as the BCBA, the social worker, those two particularly, while there are many other, everything on here should be given. And walking out of here a couple weeks ago, the conversation was, it must get difficult after this number of years to know that everybody's asking for things they absolutely should have, and you know you can't give it to them, and that's true. But I'm specifically talking about those two things, at least those two types of things, because if the students aren't socially, emotionally prepared to learn, it won't matter what we have other than that. So I really, really, really would like to put the BCBA and the social work into the top priority category.
So I'm seeing Maureen nodding along on that. How does the rest of the committee feel? Paul?
I agree. I mean, I think those not only are making sure that our students are ready to learn, but over a 5-year period of time, they're going to prevent us from probably having to spend a lot more money somewhere else.
Yes.
And, you know, I mean, they're big costs, they're big additional costs, but when are we going to feel those costs if we don't do it now? And how much will it be then? And the custodian fits into that as well, because maintaining the buildings prevents the capital expenditures that we need to do bigger repairs later.
Go ahead, Maureen.
I just wanted to add, because I agree with Deb, but also wanted to add, make sure it's included, is the special education teacher for middle school, because the idea is it would be addressing the same needs, the social and emotional needs.
Same category.
Same category,
Yeah.
thank you.
So can I ask this question? I don't see these qualify as a must-do, but I'm seeing a lot of nods around the table that this is something that the committee considers a high priority. Should we be qualifying this in saying to Brian and Kyle, I'm going to include him in this too.
It's going to be his fault.
Yeah, you know, that when the budget is redone so that we have it going forward, that's something, these should be considered in the top priority column, but not in the must-do column? I feel like more like we're sorting here rather than, yeah.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I'm not going to speak for everybody, but addressing the social and emotional needs of our students is a top priority. So whatever we can do to, budget-wise, to address the issues that we have year after year, and we've listened to the principals year after year tell us how challenging it is for all students, not just the kids that have the issues, but for all students because they don't have the proper staff. So I view it as a top priority.
Dina?
I would actually put the social worker and the BCBA in the must-do category, because to Paul's point before, if we do not be a little bit proactive with some of this, this could cost us more money down the road. I do think that we have a trend in special education right now that more of our students are having emotional and social issues, and I'd like to see that nipped in the bud. The fact that the middle school principal was here saying that that is his number one concern right now at the middle school means to me that we need to start dealing with this more at the elementary school level as well. The other thing that, just as an aside, it kind of relates to this too. The other thing that I think the school committee should consider is, as the superintendent noted, we do not have stabilization funds, which we could establish for general SPED and for regional transportation. I think we should consider doing that so that we can, granted, it probably wouldn't be a lot of money, same as with OPEB obligations, but we should start putting money in those accounts. And I think by putting those stabilization funds in place, that helps to safeguard totally decimating our E&D fund, which we have been using fairly consistently. And it also, I think, could bring some measure of hopefully relief to the town's minds as far as planning ahead and looking at those contingencies that could wipe out our budget. I mean, we're already in a budget freeze this year, literally. So I would like to avoid those things in the future. So I'd like us at least to consider that in future meetings.
So just a quick comment on that, just so everybody's on the same page. Establishing those requires town meeting votes. Okay, it's not a committee, I mean, the committee can take the vote to tell the towns, essentially, we need you to put this in as a town meeting article, right? That's within our MGL
Authority.
abilities, I guess, but that is not up to us. And then the funding is also a separate, would have to be handled separately.
Agreed, but again, that goes back to the point where the towns are concerned about the drivers in our budget. SPED certainly is one, and by establishing that stabilization fund, that almost gives them some measure of control as well, which I certainly think that they desire.
We can have that conversation, I guess. I'm not convinced that, yes.
I was going to say an easier structure and something I haven't said out loud, but we came into this year with a $279,000 or $97,000 balance in circuit breaker. So ideally, if we can build the balance, so this is in my mind thinking, oh, we could be on our way there. And again, we didn't plan for that. It was the way it happened. We unfortunately need that balance just to survive this year. But if we could build the balance to the point where it roughly is in the same vicinity as our expected revenues, we can then budget out of that without having to wait to hear what the state's going to fund. So if we had $1 million in circuit breaker, we could say we're going to budget $900,000 out of it, and we're anticipating roughly $900 next year. Great. So if it comes in at $900, it replenishes. If it comes a little less, doesn't matter. You're still taking the $900 that you planned. So you could almost use it as a stabilization account that's much less restricted. So I think there are mechanisms that I like the term ownership, right? I mean, the skin in the game type of mentality. But I think there are structures that would allow us to achieve that stability with a little more control, potentially.
Then that's what I'm asking for.
Yeah,
I think that
absolutely.
those discussions need to happen because I think we are cut close to the bone, and we don't have a lot of wiggle room, and it's not fair.
Paul?
Brian, when we have these balances, is there a mechanism to shift those balances into stabilization funds if we had them set up legally?
Yeah, so you can fund stabilization accounts. You have to fund a stabilization account by voting a budget balance. So we could set a budget up right now, we could include $500,000. The towns approve the budget, that money funds a stabilization account. You can also do it, so that's one mechanism. The other mechanism would be at the end of a given year, when we go to adjust the budget, we know we're gonna have a surplus. My 15th year, can't remember any surpluses, but if we had a surplus, and we, rather than allowing that surplus to fund through to E&D, if we know it, we could vote, say, we're gonna take 100,000 and fund stabilization, and then that doesn't impact the towns, per se, it's just an adjusted budget, just like when we're taking money out of E&D, we could be putting it into a stabilization the same time period.
But I thought you just referenced a balance of $297,000.
So that was circuit breaker. So that's a revolving account. So those are the reports you get every month. So
Right.
that's, circuit breaker comes to us from the state, goes into a revolving, and we charge, just like full-day kindergarten tuitions. We came into the year with a 297,000 or 79, can't remember the exact number, balance, unanticipated over last year, because things, the charges were less. This year, obviously, was a little different, and it got worse after the start of the year, so we ended up using all of that balance.
The only other thing I'd like to do is, I agree with what people have said about priorities. I don't want to put any of these things into a must-do category. I think we should go to the high priority. And the reason for that is, as we go through this process, I want to be able to say the must-do is mandated, it's contractual. And some of those things, they're very important. I just want to put them in high priority. Now, when we make our final determinations, we can then shift them into the must-do, and by then it'll be done, in the sense that, just for the process purposes.
I would agree with that. I feel like you shoot your credibility into the foot if you just start putting things into the must-do column that aren't an absolutely have to do it. Like, there's no other alternative.
To me, that's where those fall, just for the record.
I didn't hear you, Dina.
I said, to me, that's where those fall. I totally understand the process, I agree with it, but just stating for the record, that's where it falls for me.
I'll just say, I feel like there's an undeniable need there. I also feel like there's been a lot of work done already in the schools that, it's not like nothing's been done, right? It's just that more is needed, and I feel like in this, more will always be needed. So we have to temper the immediate need in a long-term reality, I guess. And that's why I would say it's not a must-do. It's it is high priority to get more in there, but when you look at it in the big picture and not just this year, that's when I feel like those two categories come, make a difference.
In fact, I think the word committed, not committed like we're committed to things, but truly committed funds, meaning we have no choice. So the only things in that line, again, we pulled the uniforms out, but the only things that are in the must-do category that we have any decision on is the COLAs and the salary reserve. Everything else is a bill we're going to get. So that's where I feel like for me to look at this as things we don't have any say over, versus something, and we could say highest priority, middle priority, lower priority. So we can categorize those however we want to. I just think it's helpful so that you can see the things that you most literally don't have any control over. And then from there, talk about your highest priorities and yeah.
Linda? Sorry, I'll come to you next morning.
Last year, we put in a BCBA just at the Newbury Elementary School, correct? And that person goes to Salisbury, Rowley, and to the middle school?
So there's two. So we previously had all through contracted services. One is dedicated to Newbury for the autism spectrum disorder program. The other person basically does a day a week in the other schools.
Okay, my priority would be for another BCBA to start with, so that at least there'd be two. Because if, maybe a directive to David, that if we have anybody that has to be pulled out, go to a 45-day, how much is that for one student to be taken and put into an outside?
So it's roughly $15,000 for a 45-day assessment or an extended eval. But to be honest with you, once we get to that point, it's very rare that the decision is made for the student to come back. Now, we have had students stay for a short period of time and then come back the year after, so which is great. But I think, the BCBA is a very proactive mechanism to help support students and teachers. And also, the way we've structured it this way, the BCBA is available for anybody in the school. So it doesn't need to be through an IEP, it doesn't need to be through a referral. So if a principal is having an issue with any student, they have the ability to direct that person wherever.
Right.
Or this teacher needs support, she needs a behavior plan. It could be a class-wide, sometimes we do get classes that are more challenging than others. So it's given us the flexibility to do that. And I would say, I think Pine Grove is the only school that currently doesn't have 2 people to support students, meaning it's different models, but each, like Salisbury has a psychologist and an adjustment counselor. The middle school has 2 counselors. The high school now has 3 because of the Bright program. Now Newbury has a full-time BCBA. So I think for Pine Grove, they have just an adjustment counselor and then the one day of the BCBA, and then of course, we can supplement if we had to. But I mean, the BCA certainly, you heard principals basically begging for more support
Right.
throughout the whole process. So.
And that's what I just want to make it publicly of how important these BCBA, the social worker are. So my thing would be, what does the middle school have for support?
So they have 2 counselors, so an adjustment counselor and then a guidance counselor. So
If we did add a BCBA, would it be just at the elementary level, or does that person go up to the middle school?
well, Chris is specifically asking for her school, but as we go forward, we would have more flexibility, and it would also free up the person that's going to, then she wouldn't need to go to Pine Grove anymore. It would be just the middle school and high school in Salisbury. So it would sort of improve the process for everybody.
So that would be what my request is, if there's at least one that we can put in, that would probably be the best one to put in, because they could go everywhere and help whatever's needed.
Yeah, and it's made a significant difference even for Beth at NES, and I think it was purposely because of the amount of kids on the autism spectrum that she has, but the years past, I mean, she was basically, it took a lot of my time, it took a lot of her time, and she and Dan Jewett were running around most of the time trying to put out fires. Now I think she and Dan have been able to fulfill their roles as principals again and not having to respond to every crisis, because now there's a person in the building that's their expertise, that's what they do, and that's what their job is. So it is made, even with the addition of more kids this year, it's much calmer. Things are, so it's made a direct impact for the whole school, because when the principal is not available and the vice principal is not available, and there's a student having a major meltdown in the middle of it, it affects everybody. If you're trying to evacuate a class so I think the ripple down effect is huge for the whole school or the whole system.
But we should say too, yes, the request came through Christine. The need is district-wide. So while one of the BCBA's is assigned to Newbury because of a specific program and a very high-needs population, we could also add a BCBA that is another person to use district-wide. So again, ideally, we have resources in every school, but if we need to share district resources, increasing the number of district resources is not as good as a dedicated person, but it certainly adds another professional to add into the mix.
Right. And that would be what my request would be add one more BCBA.
You up next?
Yeah, I just wanted to, put it in a plug for the math specialists at the elementary schools to be increased to full-time. It's a cut we made, I don't know how many budget cycles ago, and we know there's definitely been a negative impact on that cut, and the teachers, the principals continue to tell us there's a need for that, so I'd like to see that placed in the top priority category.
So I'm just going to take it back to the BCBA's because I want to come to a conclusion on that before we move on to something else. So I guess the most recent thing I've heard was one district-wide in the top priority. I know I've also heard from a couple of places taking all of the BCBA's / and anybody in that category, social workers, and putting them in the high priority. What is the will of the committee to direct the superintendent to do?
I was going to say, so it's helpful for me to hear mental health is a high priority, correct? All right, so then what I would love to do is the three of us, Kyle in 9 days and counting, and meet with the principals to say, okay, so here we have, with the committee understands mental health needs, we have to live within reason, you know, before we even get to the point of saying, is even this a possibility? But that's helpful feedback to kind of take back to the team and say, what would we then agree as a leadership team would make most sense? If there was going to be funding for it, what would be the priority? I mean, I heard an elementary principal say, at this point, I think the halftime custodian is more important than the math specialist to full-time because of the nature of the buildings, right? Because so when we cut out a halftime custodian, I think I explained the math to you a couple months ago. Pine Grove School is 91,000 square feet. It's 80,000 roughly cleanable every night, and there's 2 individuals doing that. So a person is cleaning 40,000 square feet a night. So that affects every single teacher when they come into their classroom. Again, little kiddos sitting on the floor, obviously less of an issue with the upper grades at the elementary, but that's a very real need
Yeah.
when we're talking priorities.
That was going to be my next top priority.
Yeah, I can tell you that is one of the higher priorities on this list. Just because you have a brand-new building at Pine Grove that, where it's a challenge to have 2 individuals clean, and it's no different for whatever the 102,000 square feet at Newbury and 100 whatever thousand square feet at Salisbury. So,
I also feel like we're seeing capital maintenance items grow on
Yep.
some of these lists, and maybe if we had a properly staffed custodial team at Newbury, we could.
yeah, I would say most of that is maintenance, that's routine maintenance and repairs.
Right.
What fails is the cleanliness of the building on a daily basis.
Right.
Teachers, you know, having the basics of, are the bathrooms cleaned and the trash emptied? So there's the basics, but then when the floor doesn't get swept, that, in the middle of a winter, you've been in a first grade classroom, good Lord. I mean, it looks like a beach going down the hallway. So, you know, even in having an additional half-time can take it from, you know, a beach to just a semi-clean parking lot.
So Brian, with the custodial staff, if they had the opportunity to replace the floor tiles, we would be maintaining the floor that way as opposed to worrying about a project that would cost an additional expenditure because we have to do a whole thing at once. Is that accurate or no?
So say it again, so if we did replacing the floor tiles,
So if we had the increased custodial time available and opportunity for them to replace the tiles as they come up, would we still be looking at an expenditure to replace the 3rd and 4th grade hallway all at once as opposed to the piecing along the way?
it would, just because that's the nature, that's the reality is, in that hallway, the tile was put down in 1994, so that's just tile coming up. So they still maintain it and cleaning. The head custodians do maintenance at the elementary level. The evening custodians, which this would add a halftime at each of the elementary schools, is literally cleaning. So it's very rarely that they're doing any maintenance. No, it's just a matter of, I mean, they're getting stripped and waxed every year, twice a year, but it's just the nature of the tiles are pulling up. They've gone beyond their useful life.
So going back to the BCBA's real quick. Because I want to settle one thing before we move on to the others, because I feel like otherwise we have so many balls in the air that we can't get back there. What I'm hearing Brian say is that he would rather not have a priority on this, not have anything specifically set, but take that concept of mental health as a high priority concept back to the leadership team, and then potentially come back here with commentary or suggestions or something like that on that. Is that acceptable to the committee? Maureen?
I would just say I'd prefer to do it that way because I recall, I don't remember if it was this year or last year, and I believe it was Principal Nealon saying how sharing a BCBA would be really challenging. So instead of us like picking a number, like we'll have 1 or 2, I'd prefer to get the expertise of the principals of if they think that's even a doable idea to reduce it like that.
Paul?
I mean, it does seem like the elementary schools principals have identified where their mental health needs, and that Pine Grove said that they need a BCBA, and Salisbury said we need a social worker. And those elementary school levels, that help there trickles all the way up. So to me, like, getting those schools what they need is really high priority, because Newburyport had their incident a couple weeks ago. If you're dealing with that younger ages, then maybe it doesn't happen at the high school. Maybe you don't have those severe problems at the high school level and the middle school level. And so to me, getting those young kids the help they need, the support they need, the mental health they need, and if that's what they're identifying, I mean, obviously bring it back to them and say, saying this is what the committee is saying, but if this is what we're saying, then I feel like that's where that need is. That's what was identified to us. But
Good. Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
On that same thought, the request last year was all social workers until they got introduced to the BCBA and different ways of dealing with mental health to make all the teachers responsible and teaching them. So I think him taking it back to the leadership, they'll better understand, because we only got one BCBA last year and it seemed to help all the schools, not as much as they wanted to, but they were in a better place this year than they felt they were in last year.
So am I hearing a general, at least majority of the committee, saying that that's the direction to go in? Okay, so putting that aside, I guess the next thing would be, sorry, I'm just going to go right through the list that on the most recent document. The next thing would be, I think, the math specialists that I heard come up. Am I even in the right section? Well, math specialists you had brought up first.
Okay, that's fine.
So I was just going to go there next and see where we're at. So thoughts on math specialists?
I think if Kim could explain what the math specialist does, just so the public hears it as well.
I know I have to do that. I'm like in the habit of doing that, sorry. So like the reading specialist, the math specialist's role varies. Math specialists are asked to provide PD for teachers, both out of school and within the classroom, so coaching, which is probably one of the biggest things that have been impacted by cutting or reducing the math specialist position, because currently what they're doing right now is working with students in one-to-one settings and doing interventions. And so that's really, really important, and of course they don't want to cut back with those services. So what the services they have had to cut back is some PD time. We also have one math specialist who is being shared between two buildings, which is very, very difficult. In addition to trying to support students who are struggling with certain standards within the mathematical world, they're also trying to provide extensions to students. So they are very dedicated, and they are 0.5, but they are doing a full-time job, and they're getting burnt out, I can tell you that. And I do not want to lose them. We have one who is a doctor, and she got her PhD. She's incredible. The amount of work that they put in when they do run professional developments, and they'll run it usually during the summer times, or they do offer some after school. They're putting in a lot of time, and that's not to say that we all are, but they could do so much more if they were full-time. And I would just say that for the last, 4 or 5 years when we cut them, every single year, that is the constant that you hear when the principals come back, they say math specialist, math specialist, math specialist, in addition to mental health. And when you hear those themes over and over and over again, to me, that speaks to the need that we really need these people back. We value them. They do amazing things, not just with students, but with staff. And yeah, we need them back. And I think it was the ETC position Beth was talking about.
No.
She was talking about, really? Okay. So anyways, yes, I would say that would be a top priority for them. But again, we could certainly bring it back.
Anybody else have commentary on that?
I think the difficult discussion is they're all needs.
Right.
Right? And so I
How
think
do you prioritize?
we have to frame this in the context of a must-do increase of $2.1 million and the reality of what that does as far as assessment to towns. So certainly, when we come back with the next discussion on the 5th, that's the context I'm operating within. I assume that's the context you're operating within, that there has to be some, as the discussions continue, there has to be some reasonable kind of logical next step and assumption in regards to whether this is feasible or not. And I know the principals go through this every year, and it's frustrating for them. It's frustrating for everyone to say, here's what we need, knowing they're probably not going to get it. But I think we have to kind of start to winnow that down towards the things that, in the current context, what are the highest priorities, right? So in the context of if nothing changes in regards to the assumptions made so far and the things that we can change in the must-dos, is anything further possible versus cutting cutting existing services?
Right.
So I think just as far as the content, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about priorities, but I think that would be helpful to say, for the committee to identify the highest, we talk mental health. Everyone talks mental health, right? I mean, that is the greatest need. So that's not shocking that is one of the absolute highest priorities. And then we have to go back and figure out, okay, so how do we meet that need, knowing that's a priority?
So I think part of my goal in addressing each of these as they come up was to just see how they measure up against each other. So, I mean, I think it's clear that mental health is a very high priority across the committee. Math specialists maybe, custodians maybe, but I'm hearing that mental health is the absolute highest. And then, we're kind of working our way down from there. Yeah. Tina?
So I would agree, going back to what Paul said and what you piggybacked on in terms of sorting through the must-dos and the top priorities. And I think everyone's pretty much agreed in terms of what the top priorities are. But if we're thinking, I hate to use the word strategic, but after the public comments today, we have to be strategic. I mean, we've made a lot of progress in terms of having consistent DCCs and doing the state advocacy, and that has obviously helped in a lot of ways. I do believe there has been increased communication between the town and the school, and that's great. But I still think that there's a large gap for us to close in terms of building consensus, because even if we all agree, because we're on the committee and we support our administrators, the principals, and our staff here, we're not going to get anywhere if we don't have consensus with the towns. So then it becomes, and I hate to be a Debbie Downer, and I don't believe pointing fingers is effective, but then it really becomes a cultural thing in terms of what do our member towns and select boards really believe in terms of the value of this school system as a whole. And so I think going directly to them, as opposed to just these meetings, which I don't know are super effective in building a case for what we need as a priority, because I don't know how many people are actually watching or understanding, because there's no back and forth. I feel like we need to think of another way beyond the DCC, that maybe we can meet with the chairperson of each town, like with Brian and with Kim, to really explain the needs and the long-term vision, because we're making decisions based off of short-term goals to fit the budget into something that is like palatable for everybody. But we're discussing what we know based on our experience and our discussions and our exposure to it, that long-term, we need BCBAs. We need these things at the elementary school because it affects everyone long-term, and especially with special ed costs. I think we can not argue, but we can discuss for the next few hours, yes, BCBA, math specialist, custodian. I mean, I would argue that all the personnel requests that all of the principals requested are top priority. However, what's the probability that we're going to get any of those? So I'd rather spend time discussing what's our strategy to build consensus, because if we don't have it from our select boards, the towns are certainly not going to vote for anything that we ask.
Paul?
I'm going to take a contrary position. I agree that there's a need for consensus, but I think that we go out of our way. I think Brian, in the last 12 years has made this budget process very, very transparent. I think there's an obligation of the municipal officials to be at our meetings. If they want to come to DCC, great. If they want to come to these budget meetings, even better. If they come to the school building heads, representatives, I don't want to stretch Brian any thinner than he already is to go out to the municipal officials directly. They need to come here. That's all there is to it. This is where the information is, and if they don't want to come here, they can watch it on TV. I think Brian's got enough on his plate.
Deb?
I agree with Paul completely. I absolutely, going back, and I hate to do this all the time, but it has gotten better and better and better. Every year it has gotten better and better. And to me, it's unprecedented, the amount of opportunity that this school district now gives the municipal officials, the town officials, to engage with us. And I can't imagine a more appropriate or a better vehicle for that other than the DCC meetings.
So I guess I have a couple comments on that. So the work we're doing today is our job. We have to do this. This is our responsibility as a school committee, right? When it comes right down to it, we have 3 responsibilities. The budget is one of them, and weighing in on the budget through a process like this is something we have to do. Whether it's always productive, whether it's fruitful, time always tells on that. You're restricted by the process, but we have a job. We need to do our job, right? And I guess on the rest of it, I would say, coming to our meetings does not provide a place for discussion. I think it's absolutely, this is where the detail happens, right? Everybody should be staying up on what's going on in meetings kind of across the board, right? That's one of our jobs, I guess. But it doesn't provide a place for discussion, which is where I see the DCC happening. I would say personally, I would be against anything happening behind closed doors. Once it gets in private, once it's not in public, things go badly. And I would be, there are situations where logistically it makes sense to plan in a much smaller group, but as far as these big discussions, they have to happen in public. Legally, can they happen in private? Yes, but I think it would be a detriment to the process. It would be in disregard to the priorities of the district and the way that we have to function and what we're supposed to be doing if we move anything in private at this point. That's just my very, very strong personal opinion. So that said, I don't want to go through line by line. I don't know if I gave anybody that misconception, but is there anything else that the committee feels strongly needs to be pulled out of here? Maureen?
I just want to know, are we going to have any kind of discussion on the proposals of the full-day K? I just feel like that by trying to fund it slowly, we're just being proactive because it's coming. I mean, it's coming quicker than I think we realize. We have districts around us that are moving in that direction, so I do believe we need to consider that.
So I can say I was going to bring that up at the end if nobody else brought it up, but I'm happy to have that discussion now. My take on this is indeed similar to yours. I think the writing's on the wall. This is going to happen. They're, as a matter of fact, talking about compulsory pre-K. Forget kindergarten, because I think the majority of Massachusetts doesn't even realize that full-day kindergarten is not required for all districts. Like, that's just not on it's a lot of the legislators represent large municipalities, and they all have it, and I don't think they even look outside their little districts to see where it doesn't exist, because it is very pocketed where it's half-day K. There are 3 bills, I think 2 in the House and 1 in the Senate, if I remember correctly, right now that are sitting with the Joint Committee on Education. I don't know if they'll move, but it's clear that the districts around us are feeling like they're going to move eventually. And regardless of what happens with legislation, I think that's going to force our hand, because the easiest place for a child to go out of this district on choice is kindergarten. They go to kindergarten in another district. There's definitely, you talk to parents and, well, I've got a kid in 3rd grade, I've thought about going someplace else, but my kid has friends here. Right, the easiest time for them to go out is kindergarten, and I think we have to be very, very aware of that as the districts around us move to full day K, because the reality that we could end up with an additional, whatever, $50,000 or $100,000 in choice charges against us as the districts around us go to full day kindergarten, free full day kindergarten, is real. I mean, there are families already that go to the charter specifically because of that, because they can choice out of our district and get free full day K through the charter. And, you know, I don't know. That's just my take on it. My preference would be to put that as a very, very strong, you know, if there's any possibility, or we may even have to make a decision and say this has to be a priority for us, rather than paying $250,000 or $300,000 down the road plus choice. It may be something that we have to do. I think we also, actually, I'll leave it open because I have one other priority, but I'll leave it to the end and say, is there anybody else that wants to introduce anything else along this? Dina?
The reduction of athletic fees and the decrease of the family cap. I would love to get rid of those user fees, but we have been dependent on them for so long. I'm wondering if there's any appetite for phasing that in over 5 years. So it's a little less, saves us a little money right now, with the ultimate goal of getting rid of that. And actually maybe even do the same thing with the parking fees, if we slowly phase that in. There are other things in here that I would rather fund with that money, and just a thought.
I just want to comment on the parking fees. I think we really need to listen to the administration, okay? And I think we need to cut them, okay? Just lock, stock, and barrel, because Brian, it's been a thorn in his side for years. It's a manpower drain. Mr. Brennan is far more worthy of things than chasing kids around about parking fees. So, you know, the time is here.
I would just say, I mean, I hate our user fees, and I believe it from the core reason, or the concept, right? The whole concept of charging a fee to participate in public education drives me crazy. The parking, it's the bang for the buck, right? I mean, there is $300,000 brought in through the student fees across the district. That's very real dollars. Between 14 and 16, 20, $21,000, the amount of time and energy and resources that takes, if anything's going to be feasible, it's that $20,000 that I think would be, as far as fees, that would be the priority. I mean, I think even changing the phasing in of user fees, so if it's 75,000, it'd be, so that's 300,000. So I mean, yeah, not a huge difference.
I know I'm looking for pennies, but pennies add up.
Absolutely, right. So I think that, you know, if we phase that in 5 years rather than 4, that goes from 75 to 60, so you save 15,000, it's still a $60,000 increase. I still think that 20 is it's for the students too, right? The reality is not, I think you said, Maureen, the majority is, or the reality is the majority of kids, it's the families paying the fees. And we have a sliding scale, that we accommodate that as best we can. A lot of students are raising their own $180 to pay that fee. Considered more of a privilege and all of that, but it's just.
I'd also just like to add that, you know, Paul said to listen to the administration, but also to listen to the students, because for I don't know how many years I've been sitting here listening, reading the school newspaper. They're writing articles every year about the parking fees and how it's a hardship for them. On VTV, there's been pieces about the parking fees. So again, just I think it's important to listen to the students as well.
Okay. Anything else on that? All right, I want to just go back to Dina's comment on athletic fees too, because I didn't realize this, and I don't know if, you know, I'm always about passing on the research that I did, but I was actually curious to go look at other districts, and I found that that a lot of districts actually do not charge athletic fees, and they're the districts that we've heard screaming about having 30 kids in a classroom, so they are literally not charging athletic fees and taking that funding from essentially the number of teachers that they have. So It was interesting. I looked at Boston, no athletic fees. You look at Worcester, no athletic fees. You look at Lowell, no athletic fees. But they have those high classroom sizes, so they've literally made athletics, because of their student population and the demographics, a priority over lower classroom sizes. We don't have the demographics that a Lowell or a Lawrence or a Worcester or a Boston does, but those students exist here. They may not be the majority, but they still exist here. So I think it's worthy sometimes to look at other districts and what they're doing in representing their majority demographic and the decisions that they make, whether we agree with them or not, right? In looking at what may be going on with some of our more minority demographics in the district.
So just to be clear, I mean, we waive fees. So if
Yes.
someone can't afford it, so the reality is the majority demographic here can afford it.
Yep.
So it is a revenue source. If they tried in Lowell, they would not be a revenue source because the majority would be in that waived category. And
Yes.
you don't get the money that you're trying to raise, so.
And I absolutely agree, but it also comes down to transportation and other
Yep.
costs, having your own cleats, having, all that stuff, so,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I just want to ask a clarifying question. If they receive assistance for the 350, do they have to be on the free and reduced lunch? So there is a population of students they're not on free and reduced lunch, and they're not playing sports because they just can't afford that 350.
Any other priorities that anyone wants to raise? The last one I want to raise, and I know I've been beating this drum for like 3 years, or maybe more, is OPEB. We talked about this briefly in Finance Subcommittee the other day, but I think we have to be looking at the long-term health of the district, and one of the things that we need to make more of a priority, as much as we want to do things immediately, is keeping up our E&D and not touching it, and starting to fund OPEB. Because if we don't do that, we're going to be in major financial trouble down the road, right? If you even look back, I mean, I've been on the committee for 5 years. If you look back to the beginning of any of your tenures, even, not necessarily Aaron, I guess, but even like Tina coming on, it was 600,000 in our E&D. It could cover a situation like we thought we were getting into earlier this year with our special ed tuitions. We can't even cover that now, right? Our bond rating was much higher, so that if we had to bond something like the stadium, we were in a good situation to do that, and we're not anymore. And we know the two things that we have to do that is to maintain our E&D and stop touching it, and to fund OPEB. So as much as I would love to see everything else addressed, I feel like OPEB has to be on our list as well, because we have to get better financial health for the district. Deb?
That's true. Because we did have that discussion at a Finance Subcommittee meeting, and even though we probably don't have another $25,000 to put into it this year, if we just put $1,000 into it, I mean, that's nothing in the overall scheme, but it would at least show something to people that it was a priority. So again, not anticipating able to have put $25,000, but anything, just as it was maybe a symbolic donation, symbolic deposit.
Yes. Paul?
You had made the comment that it made our bond rating higher, and I don't know if that's higher or lower, but I think it made our bond rating worse.
Not funding it makes our bond rating worse, yes. Yes, sorry, maybe I missed.
So I agree with you 100%, I really do. I would like to see it become a line item in our budget, I really would, because, for us to turn around and work with the towns, and the towns have better bond ratings, and we don't, I mean, it's a reflection upon us. We're the budget people, we're the money people, and I think we have an obligation to work in that direction. I really do, whether it's $1,000, $20,000, I think we need to work, as well as the stabilization funds, if we could create something for the E&D. The SEP, I think, is really critical, because that's our biggest wild card.
Yeah, and I think that it's a discussion to continue having with the towns. There will be capital costs on this campus someday. So to us not have, we will be bonding regardless, because it's a district-owned property, and the towns will be paying that assessment. So the towns will benefit by our bond rating getting better. So take everything else away, right? The we should be, the moral obligation, just the true financials. Putting a $20,000 line, a $25,000 line, we increase it once, and then it stays in the budget. $25,000 goes in a year. Moody's isn't going to say, hoorah, Triton's arrived. They're going to say, okay, they're making a dent. Start figuring out how to not use E&D every year. Okay, they're making a dent. Get rid of that negative forecast first. Then, it's going to take a couple years to start actually increasing our rating. But to have a decreased rating and a negative forecast, not a good thing. Sorry, Kyle's going, why am I coming here? So those are simple steps that are not hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that will benefit the towns directly.
Any other priorities, Maureen?
I just wanted to see if we could discuss the curriculum. I mean, the instructional materials and text, if I remember correctly, on that, there's outdated textbooks that our students are using, and they're not even, is it math?
History and social.
Oh, sorry, that's right.
It's history and social sciences. So the current materials are not aligned with the standards. The new curriculum would move the 6th, 7th, and 9th graders to using resources that are aligned with the current standards.
Right, so I just would like to see us maybe think about putting that in a top priority so we can have our students using current materials and texts.
I would say absolutely. I mean, in our discussions and talking to the principals, so civics was added to 8th grade this year. There was a cost, went digital, Chromebooks in both of the 2 8th grade classrooms, social studies teachers. So this is the next logical step to make sure that we're teaching history and social sciences. It may not be civics, but it's more than just civics. Obviously, civics is very important these days, but it's important that we keep our materials current for sure. And this is a small investment. So my question was this. So this fully pays, I think, the actual increase, because remember there was money from science that fell off. The actual cost, I think, is $59,000. That's the full cost. There is a potential, I don't think it's been confirmed yet, that we could pay half and half. So it could be that we can do it. We just have to agree, the publisher has to agree to do that. They don't have to. So there's a potential that we could accomplish that and not have the $28,000 increase if we can get one of the publishers to do what they don't love to do and allow us to pay that over 2 years.
Or 3 years, yeah.
Or 3 years, even better. Ideally, we're putting the line in because it's social studies, social science this year. Next year, it's going to be something else. But we have to find a way to do that unequivocally. Yep.
Paul?
I fully support what Maureen said. I thought I had heard it all when Tim Ruggieri said a few years ago that he had math techs in the building that could purchase alcohol. And this year, I think I heard that there's consumer math books that are 30 years old. I mean, we can't operate like this.
Any other comments? Maureen?
And also wanted to bring up technology. We haven't really talked about technology. There is the middle school, I think, is looking for more Chrome carts. I remember Al talking about that as being a strong need. And then just the technology budget. We have had some discussions about going one-to-one. If that's a direction that the district is moving, then we really need to also be preparing for that as well.
Yeah, I would say to you, the 2 additional Chromebook carts are actually not additional. That's, again, lots of hands in this document. That's actually a lease that was started, covered under Kim's budget the first year. It was more than that, but total. So those are sunk expenses. That's actually to maintain the Chromebook carts. In that an older lease that was a donation, I forget, through TEF, I guess, that the lease was restarted, but those disappear out of the middle school, which is, it's just the numbers that they have now. They would actually lose a couple carts. So those are definitely expenses that we need to figure out how to carry forward. As far as the rest of technology, there's good work being done by that working group this year. I'm confident that we can come next year with a much more fully thought out, I keep using the term blueprint, just so that we're using a different term, so it's not the same thing as we always do. I think we could start talking about a one-to-one strategy that is not a $100,000 solution all at once. We're going to need to talk about PD. So if you're talking about PD, you need to talk about staffing rather than just training teachers. So I think, is it a need? Absolutely. I would be able to confidently stand up behind that better next year, because I think we will have thought through the entire process. And this is a process that involves actually students. You were talking about students at the next, bringing students to the group the next time. So it's been teachers, administrators, and parents involved in this discussion. So I would feel that the need, I think, will be much more compelling next year at this time. And hopefully the base request will not be as bad next year.
So to go back to the Chrome carts at the middle school then, should that $7,612 be a must-do if those are leases?
So that, I have that as both of those, the 3,200 and the 7,600, to further refine as a high priority, yes, as a top priority. To make sure that it's specifically, it's the Chromebook carts that are that's the highest priority. That's
But
what's.
it's not a must-do.
It's not technically a must-do,
Okay.
all of that. So we'll further refine that.
Okay.
Any other comments? So I just want to make this closing comment, because Paul and I were briefly talking about this at the break, that the process per Mass General Law, right, is that the school councils kind of come up with what they need to improve, essentially, what they need to affect their schools with the leadership, and then it comes up to us. I feel like, I know for certain, they prioritize. There's probably 30 things that they all need, but it makes no sense to put all those down on paper. It makes no sense to send those all up here, right? They put down their highest priorities on here. So we talk about like a wish list, as is the way it's been referred to in the past. I think that if you were really going to do what we should be doing, taking the cost responsibilities off of our PTAs, taking our cost responsibilities off of the boosters, taking this cost responsibilities off of the teachers, because they put so much money toward classroom supplies, taking the cost requirements off of the parents for the obvious ones like the fees, but just the things that they send into the classrooms on any given day. You know, can you send in Lysol wipes? Can you send in Kleenex? These are basics. We're looking at $2 million here. I would say if we were going to fully fund the district, we're looking at millions more beyond that, right? So I don't want it to seem like this is what the district needs to be whole, is what's in front of us, and that's what we're making a decision based on. To make the district whole would require much more funding than I think any of us have any concept of right now. And I will say that even with, the people who are living the life daily, to really do this right, it would require so much funding beyond what's represented here in the budget book. And it's needed. So I'll hand that back over to you.
I was just going to say that one of the other things that we've discussed, we discussed it with leadership yesterday, and I don't know if Dave wants to chime in, that special education teacher at the middle school, the population that has been at the elementary level, specifically at the program at Newbury, is now aging up. So is that one of these situations where we don't have a column called cost avoidance? Remember, we've talked about that in the past? So it's not a must-do, but is it something that will actually, by adding that program, similar to adding the additional ASD teacher for this year, as well as the BCBA at Newbury, and adding the LIFT program at the high school, that's 4 individuals that we were able to absorb by the closing of another program. Those are cost avoidance. It was new costs, but those are keeping kids in district rather than going out at 50, 60, 70, 80,000 a pop. So we talked about, again, I'm not ready to say it's an absolute must, but we talked about that middle school teacher as a very high priority, and figuring out is there a way to meet the needs of those students with existing staff and caseloads. And then the other piece we talked about is the ETC. We proposed having an additional half-time ETC at every school. We've talked about how the special ed staff has just been cut in half over the past 10, 15 years. So we had that discussion too. Doesn't have to be an all or nothing. If an extra halftime ETC to do out-of-district and upper levels allowed us to do some transition, and the big piece we keep talking about is having an ETC that would be the go-between middle school and elementaries. So if we could have an ETC who is covering grade 6 at each of the elementary schools and then 7 and 8, so that there's one person that deals with that whole transition, which is the biggest one from each elementary into the middle school. Manage that. So that's another thing we've said, okay, if it's a halftime, if it's a 0.4, is there something there that is an absolute must to continue to do the work that we have consultants coming in and spending a lot of quality time and doing good things as far as improving our special education services. So to make sure that we're monitoring that well. That wouldn't necessarily change services to students. This would be about the monitoring and making sure that the process, the IEP, the whole, the structure is working correctly.
Oh, sorry, Paul.
So just as a reflection that we don't just rubber stamp things here and say yes to the administration, Brian, is there a reason that you couldn't take one of the SPED individuals at Newbury Elementary that's dealing with this cohort and shift them up to the middle school? Has that been considered at all? Do you know?
It's based on numbers, right? So we added, there are generally as many coming in, right, in kindergarten as there are going out exiting 6th grade. So we had a single ASD teacher a handful of years ago. That blossomed to 2 ASD teachers a few years ago. For this year, we now have 3. So that's meeting the needs of the population. Didn't we have this? There's routinely, these students are coming out of early intervention, so they come into preschool at age 3. So if they turn 3 on January 27th, they're showing up here on January 28th in our programs. And if they're coming out of EI and requiring special ed services, it's compulsory education we're providing. So so the quick answer is no, because there's as many coming in the start as there are going out the gate.
So can I expand on that, though? Putting that into the next step process, how about a transition between the social, emotional aspect of it, where that comfort and support does come up with them, and shift somebody down into the role to start out with a new age group?
Interesting concept, yeah. I think certainly feel free to chime in, Dave. I mean, I guess I would say it's the comfort level of the teacher. Certainly from the student perspective, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder the comfort level of the teacher working within a school, in a staff, the supports, knowing how everything functions, is that construct more beneficial if it stays the same for all the students versus the transition up? I mean, I could see both working well.
And what's the certification too? Because I know it was K through 5, 5 through 12. Is that accurate?
That's a good point. Yeah, no, middle's separate. Right. So you can have, actually, special needs could be more grade levels, right?
Right. Yeah,
General licenses are primary, pre-K to 2, elementary 1 to 6, middle school 5 through 8, or secondary sometimes 8 through 12 or 9 through 12. But special education is more versatile.
And I would say, our goal is to provide a continuum of services and programs, and always to look forward and not react. So in looking forward, I mean, that's why and I think the committee's been very responsive in the past to adding those programs, because we've already had 4 students with severe autism from EI come in this year since September that were not really on the radar. So then those kids, when they get a little older, go to the second program and then to the third program. And then we do have a program in the middle school that services a lot of the kids, but we're getting some of the kids are going to have different needs. And then we also have the high school program and the 18 to 22 program. So we actually have a nice array of programs that we can transition kids to. So I think, just as Brian said, as soon as kids, I mean, there may be a year when if we had like a cohort of 7 or 8 kids that were coming up, but I mean, right now it's a steady flow of from program to program, coming up to the next level. So I think the middle school is to me, that would be the priority in terms of, because that's sort of the missing missing piece for the middle school. And then, like I said, the high school does have, with the Bright program and the REACH program, which again is a different population of kids, but also the TLC program, you know, so I think that's sort of the middle school is a little bit of a hole at this point, I think, or we've been able to program for the kids, but I think moving forward, that's going to be, that needs to be a priority.
Sorry, my mic is off. Any other questions? All right, anything else the superintendent needs from us?
A money tree?
Pretty much.
You say that, I'm done with you.
Lottery tickets?
Lottery, yeah, exactly. So we mentioned, my finger's stuck. We mentioned uniforms, so that would decrease. It's listed in the must-do, so that would go, I heard people talk about that as a high priority, but that's definitely would move out of the must-dos for sure. Charter, I hope to have some clarity by then. Hopefully, by the time we meet on the 5th, we would at least have the range for health insurance, so we'd know if that could come down. I don't think there's anything else. We'll be able to further refine special ed. Yeah.
Brian, in my notes through the presentation this morning, you said that the ventilation repairs for the ceramics room, is that something that you had stated before, that may move to the must-do? Is there a way to get a better idea of exactly what that cost is going to be? Because aren't those costs still estimates?
So the latest I heard was it would be fixed. It was a rerouting the entire ventilation system. The latest is they can repair what is there to the tune of more $1,200 to $1,500, which would be, that'd be something that they could cover within the regular repair line. Again, ideally, no, we'd fund it. That's a needed repair, so that would likely be adjusted, or stay where it is would be nice to have, but not necessary.
So along those same lines, I'm sorry, the other items that are in that same capital maintenance category are all TBDs. It would be very helpful to get some sort of estimate as to where those amounts would be, as well as the prioritization of those two, because I know that we haven't even talked about those and don't have anything from that grouping in the must-do category.
So we have, I have a draft, I have the finalized report of the capital facilities assessment for this campus, 300,000 square feet. Rather than tie this up with the budget, because they're not $8,000 repairs, I can tell you that. We're talking $48 million. That as an entire discussion is going to be separate. So probably in more detail than you're going to want to look through, this report categorizes every single thing from fixing trim on windows and seals to new roofs to painting to repairing concrete to structural to mechanical, literally details every single aspect over about 40 pages. So we had that report, it was in hand by the holidays. We're going to talk about maybe doing it in February, and we're like, you know what, let's not confuse that with the budget process.
And the regional agreement process.
In the regional agreement process, because obviously when we start talking about a big repair project of this campus, obviously and hopefully the towns are obviously invested in and listening in that discussion. So before having that big discussion, we agreed let's get through the budget. So I tentatively have Habib and Associates, who is the architectural firm that did the study, coming to the April meeting, and we'll present to you the full report, and you'll get to hear firsthand, and then it will be a matter of discussing, do you phase that over? They'll categorize everything as you need to do this now. You need to be thinking about this really seriously. You need to be thinking about this in the next 5 to 10 years. So I've already had discussions with Kyle about how we phase that out, and if we look at a 10-year plan and the numbers are that big, why are we not talking about the MSBA and a larger project and getting the state to partner with us? So all of that is a much bigger discussion that we'll have starting in April. That will be a multi-year discussion.
Paul?
Brian, just go back to the capital assessments for a minute. On the stadium project, you have a line item for total MSBA reimbursement, and it's 0.
Yep.
Why is the line item there? Are we supposed to get some and we don't get some, or?
Nope, it has never been there, never will be there. It's noting that we do not get anything from the state for that. That is only locally funded.
Anything else?
Nothing else that we wanted?
All right, so for those of you who are coming to the DCC, it's Wednesday, 6:30 here. For those of you who are not and will be at the next school committee meeting, it is the 5th of February, 7 o'clock here. And last note of the day, happy birthday to Kim. We'll end on a happy note.
Should we sing on camera too?
No. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
Well, you don't trust me.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor? All right, thank you all.
Oh, my God.